friends. Welcome back to another episode of the unofficial companion podcast to HBO Max's hit show, Industry. I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
And we are the Wall Street Skinny, two former Morgan Stanley investment bankers and lifelong friends here to break down everything in your favorite show, from the finance to the romance, and to give you the skinny on what's real and what's Hollywood. We took a little hiatus, but we are back and we are cranking through season 3. So we are all caught up when season 4 airs in January. And so this is season 3, episode 3. It is called It. Now, Kristen, I'm really curious to get your initial takes on the title, because when I first saw the title, I'm like, Kristen always wants me to talk about the title. Like, my mind goes to weird places. I was a huge horror fan when I was
That's where my mind went to, yeah.
And so, I read Stephen King's It like 10 times when I was a kid. So I was like, is this going to be a horror episode? And ironically, it very much is. But I don't think that's exactly where the title was going with it. But depending on whose perspective you think about it from, this is a horror movie.
Interesting. Well, so it's so funny. I have seen season 3, and there is one episode that I am dreading having to watch because I am incredibly squeamish. So I thought that this was going to be that episode. I'm like, and then it was not that. So I was like pleasantly surprised.
It's a very different kind of horror from whatever happens there that I don't know about yet.
I know you were not a fan of some of the nudity in this, but I had the same thing. And I don't know if it's also because I keep getting served, or maybe it's just because it was Halloween, but I keep getting served all these videos of the clown guy getting made up to do this horror movie. So like that has been in my mind as well. So that's what I thought it was. And honestly, I don't know what else it could be. So maybe you'll fill us in on
there's many other things that are it in this, but the horror reference, whether intentional or unintentional, is absolutely magnificent. And then as I turned it on, I couldn't help seeing in the notes that this is going to take place at the COP climate conference, which it's funny. We'll get into it, but I had never heard of it until we interviewed Jade Huang from MSIM. And for those of you who don't know, COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It's basically a series of climate conferences where delegates from almost every country around the world, they gather under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to negotiate and agree upon all like the global actions. So like COP21 is where we got the Paris Agreement. And the number of the conference is not the year, it's just the number in the series of the conferences. So every year it's held in a different country. So we'll get into it, but I saw that immediately in the title and I was like, oh gosh, like 2022 Jen Sarbach would not have known about this conference and its significance. So if you're new to the
2025 Kristen, who literally was on that same call with you, totally forgot about that, because I was like, I wonder if this is real. And then it's like, oh yeah, we literally had a call.
We literally talked about it.
I was also pregnant, so there's that. But
well, I will let you kick it off for us, Kristen. I am so excited about this episode.
Awesome. All right. Let me just rewind in terms of like where we are. So in the prior few episodes, in the beginning of this season, we had Lumi being taken public by PurePoint. So they went through this IPO. It went disastrously wrong. And so now we're opening with all of these people on a conference call. So we're in the PurePoint offices. Everyone's on a call. And someone comes in and says, equity research needs to publish a buy sell recommendation by the end of the week. And the 8% fall in share prices means that the market is finally waking up. So I want to just quickly talk about this whole buy sell recommendation. So when a company goes public, the banks that take the company public, so in this case, PurePoint, there's usually a number of other book runners who would be on the IPO. And all of the book runners are going to also have their research analysts who are like a separate division and like technically should not be influenced by the fact that they are under the PurePoint umbrella. Like
not
they're
just
working with the bank.
Technically, it is quite
It is illegal.
Illegal due to a 2003 landmark case where all of these banks were found guilty of unduly influencing their research analysts in the equities division to say great things about company both before and after an IPO. So this is not just like it's frowned upon. This is flat out illegal. And like when people think about all of the different regulatory frameworks in the financial services industry, like, LIBOR or whatever, this scandal predates all of that. And this was the case and the framework that created the so-called Chinese wall, the separation of church and state between the different divisions of the bank. And so when they talk about being brought over the wall, it's literally because of these rules.
Yeah. So the point, though, is you have these research analysts and they have to write something called an initiating coverage report, basically the report that goes out when they first start covering a company. And people really look to what do these research analysts say, much more than the other research analysts who are covering the company. And in fact, a big determiner of who the company picks to take them public often is based on the research division and the research analyst that covers the stock.
The research analyst at PeerPoint jumps on the call and says, I got to publish by the end of the week. And just to be clear, there's kind of like 3 options for him to publish. He can publish a buy recommendation, a sell recommendation, or a hold recommendation. So either I'm super positive, I'm super negative, or like don't do anything, just like keep whatever your position is in place. And it always makes me think of that hilarious scene from Arrested Development where they've got the Bluth company and Jim Cramer's talking about it. And he's like, he upgrades the Bluth company from sell to don't buy. And there's like a massive celebration. They're like, don't buy, this is a great day. It's absolutely hilarious. And it makes me so happy. But don't buy is not an actual research category. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah. So then Henry remember, he's Jon Snow. He's the CEO of Lumi. And he's like, Lumi is the future of the sector. And he wants to make sure that they know that he's being invited to speak at this global climate conference. And he thinks that that's going to be a positive catalyst for the stock. Robert, meanwhile, is like, why is our research analyst being so confrontational to the stock? He's supposed to blindly support us, which obviously is not. And so the research analyst is asking, back to this whole idea of these gas prices, which we know natural gas prices are a huge input into the valuation of the stock. And he says, what have you modeled in to your stock price if you have this assumption for rising gas? And Henry comes in and says, I've bought more stock since my lockup period ended a few days ago. You don't get a more bullish signal from the CEO than that. Now, the lockup period is usually it's 180 days, but it sounds like we find out later that they were shorter in this lockup.
His was extremely short, if you'll recall. I think it was like a 60-day lockup period that we learned during the IPO. And that's why everyone was so suspicious of his motives.
Right. But during that time, you cannot buy or sell the stock if you are an insider. So the fact that he's saying he actually went out and bought more means that he really believes in the company, even though the share price is coming down, he believes in it. No. So he says, you can't get a more bullish signal from the CEO than that. And Robert just leans in. He's talking to Yaz or to Eric. He's like, Frank does not sound like a guy who is publishing a buy recommendation. They're basically all just sitting there like, Jesus Christ, this story keeps getting worse and worse. She's like, why are there 20 analysts and 1,000 investors on this call? And so Henry then makes it known that if they were to publish during this climate conference, it could be a disaster. And Eric leans in saying that Adler, who's like the head of all of fixed income, he's on a panel with Henry, and with everything that's going on with Lumi, that could be difficult to navigate, right? Being up on the stage and having to talk as everyone is very concerned about what is happening to the share price. And so
but I say, last time we saw Bill Adler selling Lumi stock, I was fangirling over him on the trading floor, like rolling up his sleeves, picking up phones, closing deals, getting orders. So I had assumed Adler would be fully competent when it comes to spin. So maybe everyone is suspicious of the fact that he knows this kind of story with Lumi is bullshit and he like doesn't have the technical chops to otherwise sell it. I don't know, but it seems surprising to me that they would question Adler's ability to handle it.
Yeah. In the background, you then also hear Henry saying, like, look at our numbers. We've had record subscriber growth. That continues to be the key metric for our business. Subscriber growth, we continue to drive new users. But I actually want to just make one more point, which is, it's funny. I think it was either in the first or second episode where we did a deep dive on this season, and we were talking about how natural gas prices could theoretically potentially benefit a company like this. We had someone on YouTube. So this one particular guy, I'm going to call him out, KKPM7UD, actually could be a girl, I don't know. But this particular person is always so smart with amazing insights. And so they actually had a really great comment that I want to read. They said, as it relates to the natural gas exposure, my assumption was that Lumi has energy contracts with customers. That energy has to be delivered 24/7, while Lumi's green energy generation isn't entirely reliable. So they're the ones almost like the utility versus, I was thinking that Lumi was selling to utilities. They're basically like, no, Lumi is almost like the utility. So they have the green energy generation, but here's the thing with green energy, it's not reliable, right?
Yeah.
So he says in bad weather, during the nighttime, you don't have the solar, you might not have wind. Lumi has to purchase the energies from others suppliers to deliver that to their end customers. So the risk is that they would lose money on their energy sales to customers if there's the increased price of natural gas. But anyway, I was like, oh, that makes complete sense. That they're
especially since they're talking about the democratization of all of this energy, that it is direct to consumer, if you will, versus being sold to utilities who are then super regulated. So that actually does make a ton of sense.
100%. Although it's also interesting the way that different states, and then obviously now we're talking Europe, like the way that everything works is so different. But anyway, I thought that was like a fantastic insight. And so I wanted to share that because it makes sense why, again, natural gas prices could potentially be problematic for them.
Also very timely because nat gas prices like literally went vertical at the end of last week here in the US ahead of a big cold snap.
Yeah, it feels like 9 degrees here in Boston. Like it's 30. So cold.
I got taken out by ice outside and I was shocked to see ice in Charlotte. I totally wiped out this morning walking the dog.
Oh no.
Pretty embarrassing.
So I also wanted to talk about the underwriting process and everything. Typically when you do have that IPO, sell-side research analysts can't immediately publish research. There is a quiet period that's usually 10 days after the IPO. I always thought that they would have had to publish more quickly than call it 2 months. That actually
this may not be his first publication since Lumi IPO'd. There may have been another round of recommendations.
Oh, that's a good point. That it could have been
We don't know the exact amount of time that has transpired between the IPO and this. We know that the lockup period has ended. We know that
which is about 60 days.
60 days. Yeah. So we know that this is at least 2 months after the IPO. Right. Potentially more. I wasn't tracking like the seasonality or whatever, but it is winter time. Look, and it's London, so I can't tell. Winter, summer, it all looks the same in London to me. It all looks gray and dreary, so I can't tell.
It's like San Francisco.
Exactly. Eric gets a text in the middle of this.
Oh,
which,
yes.
Thanks to HBO, I had to literally screenshot and zoom in with my old feeble eyes. And this is from Wilhelmina Fassbender or whatever her last name is. She's like the one woman who was in the room when Eric got promoted to partner. And she says, I have an opportunity for you. So there's some back channeling going on there that we have no idea what that will be. So sorry. Then the scene ends. Next scene, we are in Future Dawn's office. And I freaking love this scene.
Yeah. I mean, there's the off-camera dialogue where someone asks if they could get a membership at Cocoa House, which I don't know what that is, but I'm assuming that's like fancy.
I assumed it was something like Soho House, so I looked it up. It is a social club in London. Currently, the fee to join it is £400 and then 2,500 sterling in an annual membership fee, which equates to about $3,300 a year. And I honestly think my journey into researching this was more funny than like the actual line, because I found myself on a Reddit page with a user called Fatfire UK. So Fatfire, for those who don't spit out your drink, Fatfire is a reference to the acronym that was really big a couple of years ago. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And the whole concept, right, is okay, you invest as much of your income as early as you can, very early on in life. You spend very little. And then your goal is to retire early. Now, there's 2 versions of FIRE. There's like Fat FIRE and Lean FIRE. So Fat FIRE is where you retire early and have this lavish lifestyle. And Lean FIRE is where you can theoretically punch out earlier because you intend to live pretty frugally, right? So the irony that I found someone with the Reddit username of Fatfire UK posting, what do we think of this 2,500 sterling a year social club membership, is not lost on me whatsoever. Anyway,
I mean, so just to contrast that, I believe that there was a new pro-Trump private club that launched in 2025 in the US, and the fee to join was like $500,000. So that's why when you were like, I mean, $500 or something to join and $2,500, like that seems like a deal. I mean,
I have no idea. What does Soho House cost?
That's a good question.
Or what did it cost? Like back in the heyday.
Soho House cost to join. So it looks like for a full global every house membership, it's about $4,000 a year. Pounds, actually. So that's obviously higher. But to compare that to some of these newer clubs, it's a lot of money.
That's wild.
It's not like $500,000.
Clearly does not belong to any social club. But what's more hilarious is the off-camera dialogue goes on to say it's not a very hedge fund friendly community. So let me get this straight. Okay, this fancy expensive club looks down on the hedge fund employees who need a job that pays you a ton of money to be able to afford membership. So we are starting to weave in this subtle theme, not so subtle, of hypocrisy. This sets the tone for the entire scene where they're going to hit you over the head with it.
Yeah, but that's similar to here in New York. I remember my brother saying that he was dating some woman who was an artist for a while. And I forget if it was Soho House or where it was. And they were like, they really don't like finance people. So it's like for like artsy people who also happen to be independently wealthy and have
Or
like
have
a trust fund.
Yeah, exactly.
So the irony there. But to your point, the next line was amazing where Anna comes over to Harper and is like, why did you book me coach? And Harper said, it's a short haul, lower carbon footprint. Like the irony of this woman who is in this green hedge fund, like doing good, like blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, she's annoyed that she didn't get booked first class or private.
Yeah.
And I thought that you actually believe in what you're selling here, but we know that that is not the case. I actually want to pause for a second because like we had a conversation we literally put out 2 days ago with the woman who was the head of climate advisory at JP Morgan. And I was just shocked by how much money there is to be made and lost investing and understanding climate and what's happening in the future and blah, blah, blah. And the reality of climate versus the way that it has been spun with some of this ESG stuff, I think has done such a disservice to people who want to actually really do good. And by the way, who like may not even like care about doing good. They just like genuinely like, we're going to solve cold fusion. And by the way, then we're all going to be able to like have cheap energy. So it's wild to me that because of people who were working for green firms who were like, I'm doing good. Meanwhile, they're flying on their private jet. Like that has so poisoned the well when the reality is, again, the climate stuff is actually really interesting, really important. But I don't know if you have anything else to say on that.
This episode, just so you know, spoiler alert, gets an A in my book for the nuance and all of the layers here. And I think what industry did so shockingly well was display the hypocrisy of the ESG initiatives that were, you need to be an activist and you need to be noble and it can never be about making money. And so they completely alienated the world of people who are like, but what if I need to make money to get things done? It goes back to the Cocoa House membership, and it's woven all throughout. This idea that there is a world in the middle where you can have noble goals that coexist with the desire to make money. And the two could be wed together in this super nuanced way. But one party can't get out of their own way by having to be so pounding the drum about, no, this has to be activism. And so when you tell someone often enough that they're evil and they're only driven by profits, eventually, okay, fine, I'll become the thing you say I am. And this is something we see in politics all the time. And so I think that this is woven throughout the episode. We'll get into it. There's a lot to cover here.
Awesome. So anyway, Anna then says the conference needs to go well after the shitty Lumi call. And then she asks Harper what she has coming up on the docket. So Harper, and I thought this was interesting. She said she's sitting down with Qatar's investment authorities, Carlyle's ESG arm, shout out to Carlyle. And then Anna jokes, it's harder to get a reservation with me, meaning herself, than into Carbone. So then the next scene, we're now in with Petra, who's sitting down with her attorney talking about contract negotiations. And I know, Jen, you had a lot that you wanted to pipe in on about this, so I'm going to let you take it from here.
Yeah, so Petra's attorney says, I've heard from Anna's counsel who contacted him about a re-up, meaning a contract renewal. And he says it's a 5-year deal. He then says, as your counsel, this is starting to look a lot like one of those Rocos Howard golden handcuff kind of situation. I about lost my damn mind when they made this reference because everything in this show has been so equities heavy lately. And this is like a freaking goldmine rates FX macro reference. So for those of you who don't know, young listeners, little story time. So when he says the Rocos Howard deal, we're talking about Alan Howard and Chris Rocos. So Alan Howard is a British investor, and he and 6 other partners founded a hedge fund in the early 2000s in the UK called Brevin Howard. Brevin is an acronym of the other 6 founders' last names, and Chris Rocos is the R in Brevin Howard. And these guys were rates guys. Okay, they were macro investors with a rates background. Alan was a bond guy at Solomon. He ended up being head of rates trading at some firm called Tokai Bank, which I feel like I've heard of, but know nothing about. And then he ran the prop trading desk at Credit Suisse back when it was Credit Suisse First Boston, CSFB, right? His team was making something like $500 million in pure profit for the firm each year. And allegedly he was responsible for 2/3 of that. He was getting paid like a 10 million sterling bonus in like the late 90s, early 2000s, before the bigger prop trading guys started getting like $50 million on the regular. So he was the big star there. And he did what a lot of big stars on the sell side do these days. They leave for the buy side, and he started his own hedge fund with all his little best friends. So Chris Rocos was one of the guys on his team who he took with him as a founding partner. And Rocos started his career at UBS London, then Goldman, where he was an interest rate swaps market maker. Shout out to my husband. That was his former role. Then he went to the prop desk at CSFB, where he joined Alan. So they and all these other guys had this pretty amazing run as one of the biggest, most successful macro hedge funds in the world. I think their assets under management capped out at like 41 billion. And it's still around there, by the way. There's not a lot of hedge funds who get that big and stay that big for a very long time. And a lot of Americans know the Millenniums and the Citadels and may not have heard of Brevin Howard. I cannot tell you the degree to which these guys were worshipped as legends on the street when I was on the desk. So I didn't personally have a direct relationship with Alan or Chris, but when either of them would call, it was like a fucking fire drill, okay? You would have MDs literally like falling out of their chair to answer the phone. And it was like a huge deal if an analyst, God forbid, would pick up the phone when they call. And I think I told the story last episode of when there was a power outage, right?
Yeah.
I told the story of how someone called the desk when there was an earthquake that was felt in New York City and asked our treasury trader to make a market in 1,000,001 of 10-year notes. So that's like 1.3 billion 10-year notes or whatever. So for every 0.01% that market moves, you make or lose $1 million on the wire. I think I was the person who answered that phone, and it was Chris Rocos on the other line.
Oh, wow.
So the floor is still shaking. You don't know if a bomb went off. You don't know what's going on. So Rocos made something like $4 billion in return for the fund over the time he was there. These are, again, like, people don't know. People hear about like monthly long short hedge funds. Like the order of magnitude for these macro rates guys, like it's just whatever. Also, they were super secretive, by the way. There was this rumor when I was on the desk in like 2013 that there was only one photo anywhere on the internet of Alan Howard, and it like might even be a fake. Like you weren't allowed to know what these guys looked like or whatever. Rocos was a bit of a different story. But so, actually, during that same time period, I believe the Greater London Pension Authority withdrew their investment in Brevin Howard because they wouldn't tell them what their positions were. They were like, take the returns or don't. Like, we're not, again, super, super secretive. Okay. Anyways, as often happens with hedge funds, sometimes the same thing that happens on the sell side, a star portfolio manager, right, wants to then spin off on their own. And as you can imagine, when we're talking like, you know, Alan Howard and Chris Rocos, these guys have net worths these days, something of like $4 billion and $3.5 billion respectively, right? These are billionaires. Like, parting ways isn't necessarily going to be easy, right? These are guys who will literally burn your house down over 1/100th of a basis point. Like, they're not going to be like, oh, sure, why don't you go start a competing hedge fund? So when Rocos wanted to leave in 2012, he had a non-compete with Brevin that would have prevented him from starting his own fund and raising capital. And it led to what was at the time, I think, one of the most bitter, highly publicized non-compete disagreements in hedge fund history. And that's what they're referencing here. So just to give you an order of magnitude, garden leave, which we've talked about ad nauseum on the show, they are industry standard practice for non-competes that are typically paid when people are switching firms. So on the sell side, it's like 1 to 3 months, right? It's like, listen, go on a nice little vacation. On the buy side at hedge fund, they can be a lot longer, sometimes as long as 1 to 3 years. Rocos's was 5 years. It's the longest non-compete I've ever heard of in history. So you can imagine these guys went to war. I found a deal breaker article that called it a half-a-decade death sentence that will cause his trading hands and legs to shrivel up and break off, or at least become purely ornamental.
Was that by any chance written by Matt Levine? Because Matt Levine, by the way, got his start at Deal Breaker.
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't remember. This was some very colorful language, so I wouldn't ascribe it to Matt Levine necessarily, knowing his writing style these days, but it quite very well could be. So, but that was the argument that Rocos made to defeat the non-compete, by the way. It was basically, if you don't use it, you lose it, meaning your trading skill. That if you're out of the markets long enough, you're no longer irrelevant. And it's true, right? You die if you're out of the markets long enough, both in terms of your fundraising capacity and as like your ability to deliver returns. So after 3 years, They resolved it. And Brevin Howard was one of the seed investors in Rocos Capital. So this is the broader real life history in which they are placing Anna and Petra. And it brought me so much joy. So I'm so happy I got to tell this little story because like this is my neck of the woods. I have wilder stories to tell you offline. But anyways, if you want to get back to the actual like conversation.
Yeah. So when they're talking about the contract, he says, look, it's a lot of money. And Petra says, but if I sign and I'm bid away or decide to breach my contract, Anna has claim to what? 5 to 10% of my future earnings? He says, no, 20% for 5 years. Petra goes, well, that just feels spiteful. And so he tells her that there's also a philosophy clause. So basically, if she wants to put on any trade, it has to
be trade in any size.
It has to be within this green philosophy. And she just screams, fucking cunt, before apologizing and says, that was beneath me. Harper hears this and then looks over. And Petra says, well, I'm not allowed to have my own idea here. And if I leave and have my own ideas, she wants the money that I make from them. So her lawyer asks if she has any other offers on the table because this deal is as ironclad and non-compete as he's seen. He says, if you so much as blink at a competitor, this year's comp is completely at Anna's discretion. And Petra then asks, well, what if I become the competitor? And the lawyer says, well, you're going to leave a lot of money on the table, or you can roll the dice on your own talent, maybe. And so she then knocks on the window to get Harper to come in because this was like sort of giving her an idea that like, hey, I can go out and I start my own fund, which to your point, like that's what they did with the Rocos Brevin Howard thing. So like this normally is covered.
That's what everyone does.
Yeah. So the idea that, becoming your own competitor is some way around the non-compete, like, no, that's definitely covered. But regardless, Petra says to her lawyer, say we're at the negotiation table, make it look like we're interested. How much time does that buy us? And he says, maybe a few days. So then the next scene, now we see Harper and Petra talking. So Petra's obviously frustrated. She says, Future Dawn has become a cult of personality. It's not about the best idea. It's about pleasing mother, right? All she wants to do is sit on another fucking panel and act like an omniscient moral barometer. I'm not going to sit here and outperform while the fund underperforms and collect fees from investors for being politically correct. And so Harper then goes on and says, well, maybe her offer just expedites your decision. And so Petra asks if she would come with her, meaning would Harper come with Petra if she were to spin off? And Harper asks in what capacity? And Petra says, as Jerry Maguire's goldfish, perhaps, which for those of you guys, I assume mostly people have seen Jerry Maguire.
Classic 90s movie.
It's a classic 90s movie with Tom Cruise where he decides he's like fed up and he's going to go start his own business. And as like an FU, he basically is like, I'm leaving. Who's coming with me? And like, nobody comes except for Renee Zellweger. And so then he like takes the goldfish as a symbol.
The irony is that Jerry Maguire left because of this like deeply held moral conviction that they weren't servicing clients in the best way possible. And I want to go start something that I believe in. Petra's like, no, I just want to go make money and be rewarded for it and not have to do this bullshit politically correct investing just to please Anna. So I think it's doubly ironic that Petra sees herself as leaving for noble reasons. And the noble reason is wanting to make money and wanting to have the best idea win, not the philosophy. So it's just so funny how we get these things turned on its head. But I also think it's really interesting that we're sitting here in this thing. Harper is a glorified administrative assistant at this fund. She has no leverage whatsoever. And she's like, well, in what capacity would you want me to do?
Yeah.
Acting as though she isn't climbing out of her skin for this opportunity and isn't immediately scheming with the wheels turning, right? So Petra doesn't even sniff that out because Petra's just like, what about Petra? What is Petra going to do? Like, how am I going to make this happen? So I think that's also really, really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, Harper also says, by your own admission, you like life behind the scenes. You're not a fundraiser. I can help you sell funds. And so that's the whole thing is if you want to actually be an investor, if you want to have a hedge fund, and we're going to see this later, like you actually need money to invest.
And you can speak to this so well. Your husband is a hedge fund marketer, right? Like at the end of the day, the people who are executing the trades, who are coming up with the trade ideas may have no clue how to actually raise money. No. And as we learn more about Petra, we'll see, right? Petra is a self-identified not people person. Yeah. She is just like, I want to put my head down and do the work. And Harper's like, don't worry, I can razzle dazzle everyone. Meanwhile, I'm like, Harper, you were the worst saleswoman alive. Like you were the that's how she's self-identifying here. It's like, oh, I will be like the face of the fund and I'll charm everyone into investing here. Don't you worry, Petra. You just go be your own little nerdy self. I will be the sales force, which I just think is so hilarious.
Well, but I mean, she actually kind of has a point. But Petra then says, you use your salesman's voice to pitch me as a newfangled equity long short fund with macro overlay. Although later it sounds like Harper's coming in with a macro piece of it. And they talk about
Harper's role evolves from, oh, don't worry, I'll just help you raise money, to basically, I'm ready. We'll get there. So I also think it's amazing that she's like, we're newfangled equity long short with a macro overlay. Like, hey, let's cover all the bases. Like, we want to be able to interact with everything. And so that's what the show is, right? The show is like, we're equity long short and we're macro and we're rates and we're FX. The reality is, listen, there are pod shops where like within them, you have an equity long short strategy and you have a macro strategy and you have a relative value strategy and you have all these things. And that's all great, right? But like the idea that Petra is a one-woman equity long short and macro. It's just like, okay, Petra, like we just need to be able to interact with PeerPoint and have an excuse to talk to them along every conceivable trade. So I get where you're going with this, but like for those listeners who might be thinking like, oh, can I go invest in an equity long short with a macro overlay fund? You're talking about a pod shop.
The other thing that's interesting is that it's actually probably easier to fundraise if you have one specific thing, like if you're macro or if you're equity long short, because the people that you're raising money from tend to want to pick the best of the best in the different categories as they diversify. So being 100%. Like, I'm going to do all these different things, like actually works against you if you're trying to raise money. But
think about any company. You're like, oh, we're going to sell sweaters and we're going to sell computers. And like, what? And cars. Like, hang on. What? Are you a sweater company or a car company or a computer? Like, be one.
Well, it's the same thing if you ever want to grow on Instagram. Like you start in your niche and then you expand, but you don't start by doing everything. Then you don't get anywhere. So anyway, Harper says, you put on the ideas that you think will make money tomorrow. That's your mandate. Like basically anything you think is going to make money. She asks how far Petra was in conversations with other competitors. Harper's like, were they jump off for seed capital? Petra replies, they were very embryonic, meaning like basically no.
So they started from scratch.
Yes. So Petra says, for the banks to take us seriously enough to give us research and trading lines, we need to be at $300 million. Petra says,
tracks from my time on the floor. So like in my specific seat, I mean, maybe we covered people who were smaller than that, but beyond that, there's middle markets desks at banks who cover smaller accounts. And when you're one of those smaller accounts, you don't get the same level of institutional treatment. So all else being equal, you get limited access to, like, you can't just call up and be like, hey, get me the head of the treasury task right now. Is he going to talk to me? And you also get worse pricing. So if 300 million sounds small to you by comparison, because we're talking about $40 billion hedge funds, also remember that a macro hedge fund like hers is going to be levered something like 20 or 50 to 1 in a lot of their trades. So they can still throw around some serious size if they want to. So I think that's why she has to be macro. Like equity long short, there's only so many equities that you can buy. There's only so much shares outstanding. But like when you throw in a macro overlay, like a $300 million fund can do really big things.
Yeah. So as they're talking, Petra says, you have Anna's schedule at COP, right? And Harper's like, yeah. And so she says, hunting some serious heavy hitters like sovereign wealth funds, asset managers, and very deep pockets. Petra asks, where are they meeting? Harper says tomorrow afternoon after her panel. And Petra says, why don't we see if they're morning people and basically see if they can get them to have meetings to try to pitch them on becoming seed investors in this new fund she wants to start. And Harper's like, these are flagship ESG vehicles. They're going to a climate conference. And Petra says, I bet I can prove that returns trump ideology. She says, are you ready to sell this idea? What flight are we on? And Harper says, fuck yeah. So we know that they're now going to this ESG conference to try to pitch a non-ESG fund.
And to try to poach all of Anna's investors from right out under her nose.
Yeah. So next scene, Eric is playing mini golf with Wilhelmina, who's telling him that Adler, who's supposed to be on this climate panel, but he's taking some time with family in Europe. And so
I was like, hang on. I was like, what? Like, I'm guessing there's more to this plot point because if there's a shit show with one of your clients, you want the most senior person with the best reputation to take control of the narrative. And that should be Adler and not Eric. Because if there's not a bigger plot point, then this is a ding on the writers for like hand wave, why Eric now needs to be on this panel instead of Bill Adler.
There is, I will say, he has a very valid reason, which we find out later. I won't give you any more details, but it's funny, actually. I assumed in my first watch that it was just because he didn't want to do it. Like he was like, this seems awful. Let's send Eric to go do it. That doesn't seem fun. But there, as I rewatched, I was like, oh, okay, that actually tracks.
Yeah, because it just doesn't make any sense, like from the firm's standpoint, unless Adler's just totally incompetent, which he has never been portrayed to be.
So Eric is like, well, Lumi had a pretty rocky earnings call this morning. And it's like, yes, everyone's pointing fingers about how this has been mismanaged. And Eric is defensive, right? He's like, all anyone's talking about in the advisory world is that we overvalue Lumi, and all these other ESG companies in our pipeline are wondering whether we are the right fit to back them. Europa Gas is up next. So that's this company that they want to take public that's basically supposed to be coming on the heels, and the CEO is going to be there at the climate conference. So Eric asks, am I supposed to be concerned about our ESG pivot? Wilhelmina says, someone of Adler's level dropping out this soon after the shit show of an IPO is very bad PR and making Europa even more nervous. This panel is critical to displaying an air of competency to our clients. I need you to sit next to the CEO of Lumi and make it seem like the process was hugely beneficial to all parties. Eric's like, you want me to oversell it? And Wilhelmina says, that's your job, isn't it? I assume you're fluent enough in the Lumi story to step into the void. Wilhelmina says, good for you to know that when they make you partner, they make it seem like you're on the top ladder, but you're actually just at the bottom of a new one. All right. So next scene, we have the three amigas. We have Harper, Yaz, and Robert all at a bar, and Harper's like terrible boyfriend there as well. And he's just sitting there being like, this isn't about good. It's about business interests hiding behind climate, which again is not untrue. And it seems like Harper is almost like kind of getting really annoyed by this guy finally. I still did not understand like why are you with this horrible guy? But
yeah, well,
anyway.
She has some horrible line about why she is with him.
She does
like,
later. It's like, oh, yeah. So he says, climate change isn't about science. And Robert says, I don't want to be that guy, but at this point, the only solution to climate change is a financial one. And Harper says both of her bosses are going, although I think one of them is more attuned to the whiff of bullshit that's coming off of it, which they basically say multiple times. Robert says, yes, Eric wants me to brief him for the panel on the flight over. Everyone seems to think that Lumi and PeerPoint's panel at the climate conference is make or break for the Lumi share price. And so Yaz and Harper look confused, and Robert interprets that as that he's not capable. And Yaz is just like, why are you going as well?
Robert had no idea Yaz was going. Yaz had no idea Robert was going. They've both been asked separately by Eric to join him. And it's very clear that Robert was initially staffed on it from the start, because remember, he was the one who was initially staffed with managing Henry Muck. He was by his side in the opening scenes of episode 1. He was standing next to him on the platform, but it was Yaz who had to swoop in and save the day with all of her machinations from behind the scenes of being part of Henry's sphere of the world, if you will, with Otto Moston and the newspaper guy who I still have so many questions about and all these things. But so she has built this weird relationship with Henry Muck that is totally outside of her professional role. She was never like his coverage. Robert is the one who has been professionally assigned to this task. Mm-hmm. Eric knows that Yaz pulled this stunt where she swooped in and saved the day by back channeling with Henry Muck and then going on this date with him. And then the whole thing where he like saved her from the newspapers and everything. So him inviting her along, Yasmin, it's very clear, thought that this was in a professional capacity. And now she's like, wait a minute, Robert's going along. Robert was always the coverage. I'm coming along too. What's going on here?
Yeah. So insufferable boyfriend says something else. And Robert's just like, yeah, my mate Gus is in Palo Alto working for a VC called Decarbonization Ventures, which we now know theoretically where Gus is.
Gus, who I was like just starting to like again at the end of the last season. And I'm so happy he's not here. I also think this is mildly hilarious because my college roommate also works for a clean energy startup based in California. Yeah. So it's like so many layers of art imitates life. I was like, am I Robert? Like,
yeah. Well, there's so many nods to these people who seem like do-gooders who are then like actually terrible people. The terrible boyfriend guy goes, all right, I've got to go tutor an 8-year-old with more expensive clothes than me. Thank God I remembered my Lexapro. Otherwise, I'd unload a clip on this little prick. Again, terrible human being.
I can do without this plot point of him.
I don't know why they had that in there. Anyway, the good news is that Harper then says, I'm never seeing him again. So that's obviously great. Okay, so then Yasmin gets a call and then she goes outside to take it. She has a cigarette in her hand and she's on the phone with her lawyer, that woman, Denise. And this is
the one they did cocaine with, who hooked up with Eric when they were together in her office.
Exactly. And so she says that they found her dad's boat back in the UK. And so Yaz is like, oh my God, this is great. Because remember, she's in this like horrible financial situation. All these people are trying to come after her personally in some cases. And so she's like, that's amazing. How much you think it's worth? You know, the Yaz is like, it was valued at 11 million in 2019. And we just did like the upholstery with Loro Piana. Like it should be worth more than that. And Denise tells her that it's not her boat anymore. And that the Majorcan, so remember this was like in Spain, the Majorcan police are doing interviews with everyone who was on that boat. And Yaz is just like, well, are they going to want to talk to me about her? And Denise is just like, she says she doesn't know, but that the Hanani publishing company is looking for ways to essentially make up the losses because her father had embezzled all this money. And so Yaz says, we've been through this. I don't have any money. And Denise is like, well, what about your PeerPoint job? Thank God you've got that income. She then tells her that she doesn't deserve all this before hanging up. And then we see that Denise is actually with Eric right now.
As soon as Yasmin hangs up with the barrister, she starts texting Eric and she goes, am I still coming to COP? Why is Robert coming? I hear he's going to be there. Let me know how I can be helpful for the panel. So Yaz's central storyline has always had this undercurrent of her wanting to be taken seriously for what she can contribute, not her position in society, which has, as you said, completely flipped upside down.
Right.
Nor for being beautiful, which she has used to her advantage to some extent, but that's not what she wants to be known for, right? And so Eric's getting these texts from Yaz. The attorney sees this as they're basically like getting out of bed together and gets jealous. And Eric's like, you know what? This is stupid, right? So they get in a fight and they break up from their like whatever non-existent relationship. And she calls him an old man. And this like affects Eric surprisingly.
Yeah.
And he says he wants to make sure that he doesn't fuck like one. So he is in full-on midlife crisis mode. His main concern is feeling like he's young and vital. So this will come back, but we've got Yasmin on the one side who is worried that she as a young, beautiful woman is not being taken seriously like a mature, seasoned business person. And we've got Eric, the mature, seasoned business person, allegedly, worried that he's not enough of a sexual object. So we've got them on two completely different sides of the same coin, which I think is a really interesting contrast that we'll get into more as the episode evolves.
I didn't think of that. I love that. That's such a good point. So the next scene, Robert, Yaz, and Eric are all driving to the COP conference. And Eric jokes that the conference is just ESG enough for Democrats and anti-woke enough for Republicans. And they talk about how there's going to be like so many financial heavyweights. He says looking for investors there is going to be like using TNT to fish.
Just a note here. So the conference is being held in Bern. Yaz says, oh, so this is just Davos with a fashionable green veil. So for people who aren't familiar with these things, so Davos is the World Economic Forum, which is held in the town in the Swiss Alps called Davos, okay? That's always held in January, whereas COP is held all over the world. It just so happens that in this particular year, it's being held in Bern, also in Switzerland. But Davos and Bern are two very different towns, okay? So think like Aspen versus DC, right? Bern is where the government is. And Davos is like this glamorous ski resort by comparison. So I think that that's important too, because if you are Eric, who's an American who probably hasn't been invited to all of these different things because he's just an interest rate sales guy, basically, like you're not going to the World Economic Forum as an interest rate sales guy at an American bank. Okay. So being part of these conferences, they've woven this into the story, but like this is way above their pay grade. This is like a big thing to be going to. And I think that there's a mismanagement of Eric's expectations coming into this conference that we'll see.
Yes, that's such a good point, and it's so funny, like the whole arc of that. So Eric says, we'll use the flight time for you to bring me up to speed on Lumi and the sector comms flows. Fly-in presents a united front. As they're walking into the private plane, Yaz pulls Eric aside and is just like, why are we both here? And she wants to make sure that it's not just because Henry had asked for her. And Eric says he did, but that doesn't mean that she's not useful to him. So she's now like, shit, I'm literally only coming because Henry sees me as like a sex object. So that's
like as a date. Yeah. Like
as a date,
I'm here to distract the CEO.
So Yasmin says, well,
now is when we get the opening credits. We are 17 minutes into this episode.
True.
Like there has been, we're you know what I'm saying? We're 25% of the way through.
Well, so, and then by the way, now they're on this private jet, which back to the whole initial point is so ironic. Here they're going to this climate conference and they're going in the most disastrous way for the climate possible aboard their private plane. And so Yaz says, what is the street saying in terms of brokers' recommendations for Lumi? Eric says, likely the syndicate banks will publish a mixture of buy and hold. Our analyst Frank is the tastemaker of the energy sector, though. So people are waiting on his view. Robert then asks when he's publishing. And so Eric says he heard whispers in the next 48 hours, but imagines it will be after the conference. Says the research team knows how to manage the rollout of positive catalysts for the stock. His note would be more effective with breathing room after the panel. And so Robert's just like, why are you so confident that it's positive? The tone on the call and that earnings call at the very beginning of the episode was super hostile. And he says, we did the IPO. He knows where his bread is buttered. Eric then asks if they have any scotch. Like you see again, this whole season, like Eric just unraveling and he's like kind of turning into an alcoholic. And we know, by the way, actually from the earlier with Kenny, when he fired Kenny in season 1, like he's like actually an alcoholic. He asked if they have any scotch on the plane. I mean, it's probably like 8 a.m. And then he sees the reaction from Yaz and Robert and then sort of thinks better about it. And he's like, you know what? We can drink when we brought it home.
I just want to double click on the point from earlier that basically there is this expectation from Eric that it is a given that Frank will be nothing but positive about this stock. The show is suggesting that these rules, these are like FINRA and SEC rules, that they're more of like a vague recommendation rather than like a hard and fast legal rule. Like, okay, there are some things in the industry where it's like, it's a gray area, right? Like whatever. No, this is not one of those. And this to me is a little frustrating because listen, if this show were written in like 2001, 2002, like, okay, I'm with you. But like, it's implying that there is a level of wrongdoing on the street that is like pretty wild relative to like actual regulations.
Agreed. I think though, while you technically are not supposed to do that, if you look at how many research analysts have buy and hold recommendations on stock, because they also do know at the end of the day, the investment bank's ability to get clients oftentimes is influenced by those recommendations. So even if technically it's not allowed, like there is truth to it.
Well, listen, I mean, having worked in real estate for 10 years, right? We talked about this just the other day. Real estate agents have a fiduciary duty to their clients. But if you are representing a buyer, you get paid more if you sell them a home that is more expensive. So you have a fiduciary duty, yet there is a built-in conflict of interest in the way the system is arranged. Similarly, and your investment bank and your ability to get deal fees is to some extent inextricably intertwined with the quality and the content of what your equity research analysts produce. But until you have a complete overhaul where equity research analysts don't work for investment banks anymore, right?
Yeah.
And are completely separate and their P&L and their ability to get paid and whatever is not tied whatsoever to the fees that come into the firm. Like I do see how people will linger on this, but like it is implied basically that they have their thumb on the scale so heavily that it would be shocking if he published anything other than like a strong screaming buy. And I think that is where the show takes it a little too far. But to your point too, I mean, I do think that also is reflective of the general public's skepticism.
Perception. Yeah.
About the legitimacy. And I don't know to what extent it is a function of reality. I don't read equity research reports, right? Like that's not my jam. So I don't know the content of them, right? I don't know how glowing or critical they can be in any given one of these scenarios. But I think that there is this perception nonetheless that happens when there is wrongdoing in an industry that leaves such a black mark in people's minds culturally that no matter what laws and regulations you have in place may never wash away.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, I will say, I don't know why, like, it hasn't been a thing where sell-side research needs to be separate. I mean, it just seems like that would make sense.
That's why so many people trust independent equity researchers. You're like, you know what? I know you are not beholden to any of these interests. Therefore, I'm going to subscribe to your Substack. That's why so many people try to make a name for themselves that way.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, as someone who looks at equity research more because I'm curious what their process was of coming up with evaluation. Like, it's interesting. We're talking about this Netflix, Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount bidding war, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I'm so curious just to see what assumptions people use. I don't really care what people say, buy, sell, hold. Like, I could give two Fs about it. And I honestly, like, if I'm looking at a research report, don't even look at that part or their price target. I'm just like, what are the assumptions that they made? And then so that you can take that and you can put them into your own model. And I do think that a lot of more sophisticated investors use research in that way. It's not purely like, ooh, they said buy, I'm going to buy. It's like,
Exactly.
how are they thinking about these assumptions so that I can then apply some of those to my own analysis? But I think they should get rid of the buy, sell, hold. I think it would literally just be like, this is our assumptions. These are what we think are some of the risks, and call it a day. Like buy, sell, hold.
And then you can read into it. You're like, okay, you used 5 instead of 4. Therefore, you are bullish. Now I can interpret this with your bias. So I'm totally with you. And this is why equities for me is just pass.
Well, I love equities. I think that it's so interesting. And I think that thinking through these assumptions are so interesting. But at the end of the day, because so many more retail investors buy these things, it's not so much about fundamental valuations anymore, especially nowadays. It's really more about just like the sentiment and like the story
Vibes.
and the narrative and vibes and like what's happening on Wall Street
The whole
bets.
thing matters, by the way, because that's just vibes.
Yeah. So we then have Henry walk on the plane, which by the way, like initially I thought that this was like PurePoint's plane. I was like, they would never be flying private. Like the sell side investment bankers are not getting a private plane to like go fly around. Then it made sense that this is the CEO. Like this is Henry's plane. So he walks on, he says, Mr. Tao, really glad you're replacing Bill. I had a preview of his planned remarks and they were kind of sterile. Henry then says to Eric and Robert in this like awkward way, he says, but here's the thing. We have this other cabin for the bankers. Like this is kind of awkward. And then he walks them to the back of the plane to show them where they're going to sit. Like it's like the back of the bus. While he then says to Yaz, but you're going to stay up here with me. So she gets to sit in the front while he then takes Katie, his assistant, and like the bankers and like sticks them in the back of the plane.
I will say just one thing. So to the idea that Bill Adler's planned remarks were sterile and that Eric is going to have this folksy, off the cuff, organic interaction with him, guys, these panels are scripted and vetted 8 million ways by compliance and legal. Nothing is supposed to be like off the cuff. We have been through this ad nauseum before. You have no idea how hard we fight whenever we're on a panel to be able to just riff, because that's what people want to hear. People want to hear like the organic conversation, and you have to like do hand-to-hand combat with compliance and legal. So like there's always this balancing act. The idea that Eric's just going to go out there and like wing it is insane. That's never going to happen in reality. Eric would have to submit all of his talking points and everything and have them vetted. And
Fair,
be like,
fair,
this
fair.
comma in this speech you're giving is not okay.
100%. But so then as Henry like shuttles the help, if you will, right, Eric and Robert to the back of the plane, you then see some other people walk on and they say, who's this? Right? So it's like the people that he knows goes in the back and then like some random person. And you hear someone else reply, she has 1 million Instagram followers and calls Diplo Wesley. So basically saying she has this close relationship with Diplo. And Jen, I don't know if you want to share your Diplo story.
I got to meet Diplo. That's really it. There's a photo of me and Diplo floating around somewhere that I need to get my hands on. But like, this is Henry's entourage, right? These are like his random friends who are like, oh, it's
who he's never met in some cases. Yeah.
So I didn't think it was him who asked, who's this? I think it was someone else who asked, who's this? I think he has met these people and knows these people, or he knows that awful dude whom we'll get to. And that dude is bringing random people along. I didn't place who said, who's this? But like, he knows at least one of them. And then it's like hangers on.
Yeah. So you then hear as they're talking, Eric and Robert look stunned and Katie just says to them, Henry has a taste for shiny new things. Henry then says to Yaz, he asks her if she's excited and tells her that his godfather Otto is hosting a drink mixer tonight and he would love it if she would come. So as the plane takes off, someone looks at Yaz and is just like,
this
where
awful
do I
guy.
know you from? This awful guy. He's like literally terrible. We see him through the whole episode. And as he says, where do I know you from? You see Henry give Yaz a look that like, oh shit. And Yaz,
he says, you've got that look. I think this is important to note.
Like the it. But I did love Yaz's reply. She says, I don't know, porn. And the guy says, I never watch it. My family's in the chocolate business, but I'm an investor and a producer.
No.
Okay.
She jokes that it's from porn, which is actually a hilarious response.
Yeah.
I agree.
Oh, sorry. That's what I meant. That it was a joke. But sorry, you continue. Tell the story from the beginning without me interrupting you.
He sincerely says in this performative way, I never watch it unless it's directed by women. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it's like this performative feminism. Like, I would never watch porn unless it's directed by a woman. Like, fuck off. This guy's awful.
Yeah. But Yaz then tells her she's an investment banker. She works at Pierpoint. And the guy says, I thought you were just dating Henry, which back to your point is exactly what she does not want to be there for. She wants to be there in a professional capacity, not as his date.
And she looks crestfallen. It's almost worse that he said that than if he had said, I recognize you from the tabloids.
Mm-hmm. So we then see they go to the next scene. They're all getting out of the car, and he has this just like, I have a cramp in my jaw from smiling so much, like from pretending to smile, because she was obviously clearly miserable on the plane, but was putting on a happy face. And so we then see the energy analyst get out of his car, and Eric and Robert recognize him. And Eric says, I hope his mood has improved since the earnings call. They then walk up and they say, Frankie, when are we publishing your buy note on Lumi? And Frank doesn't answer, and he just walks inside. So they then go into the hotel, and I actually loved this. I don't know why I love this. I thought it was the funniest thing. So they go to check in. It's like Robert and Eric. And they tell him that they don't have Robert's name on the hotel reservation. So
hang on. Way before that.
Okay.
He says, oh, are we expecting fresh snowfall overnight? They're in Burnt, right? Again, they roll up to this very standard industrial looking hotel. This is not Swiss chalets on the mountainside. This is a legal government business economic hub, right? There's no romance at this hotel that we see, which I think is very important to characterize throughout. And he asks if they're expecting fresh snowfall tomorrow. And she goes, no, we're having an unusually warm winter. This is so well written because they are weaving in the literal realities of climate change. Dude, my father-in-law is a Swiss citizen and my in-laws live there and they have for 30 years. Literal actual borders between Switzerland and Italy that were determined by snowpack and glaciers are changing because that has been melted. Those borders are being redrawn in the year of our Lord 2025. So like, this is a country where no one needed air conditioning since the invention of air conditioning, where it is now unbearably hot in the summers. So they have brilliantly woven in the realities of climate change, which like you can poo-poo or say like, oh, well, this is changing and this is different. It's just unpredictable, whatever it is, right? As a stark contrast to the performative nonsense of all the competing interests of all our people at the climate change who, you know, whatever. So I think that was just so amazing. Then we get to the hilarious point where they don't even have 2 rooms for them.
Yes, actually, that's so wonderful because it's funny. This is me, the engineer, Jen, the English major, and I was like, I don't know what this whole point about the snow was. Like, guess that was something. Like, guess they just and Jen's like, this is the brilliant. Yeah, this is the brilliant writing, which is so. This is why I love going through this with Jen.
Me too. This is so much fun.
So after the snow, they walk inside and they try to check into their hotel rooms and they don't have a room for Robert. And so the hotel concierge who's checking people in is like, we're really busy. So unfortunately, you guys are going to have to share.
Not even just share rooms. She couldn't even make it a twin room. She couldn't even get them separate beds. So they have to share a queen size bed. And I mean, truly the scene that we get with them, like I want more of this little bromance. Yes, me too. But I do think it's funny that Eric tries to big time her. He's like, I'm on a panel. And she's like, what country's delegate are you? And he's like, Papua New Guinea. She's like, literally everyone's on a panel, bro. And it is just so funny because I knew nothing about this world of conferences before we started this business. And now I feel like being a little bit of like a conference connoisseur, if you will. It's just so funny how like people, you like think they're big time at these conferences and like no one cares.
No. So anyway, so now in the next scene, we have Petra, who's annoyed that she had to put like $8,000 on her personal credit card. She's like, something Trump vomited up in the 80s.
She goes, 8,000 Swiss francs, which is a hell of a lot more than $8,000 on my personal credit card. And it looks like something Trump vomited up in the 80s. And I think this is such an interesting comment, by the way, because I think you would expect that to be like all gold. Like the hotel is not. No. And it's funny because there are visibly identifiable like Kelly Wearstler and Aaron Lamps in the room. So it's very clearly been modernized, but it does kind of look like it needs a renovation, which like is like the punchline with like half of Europe.
But so Petra then tells Harper to tell Anna that she stayed in London. And Harper is skeptical that Anna will believe that after the whole contract negotiation that's going on. And Petra says to tell her that she's with her son. So she says she'll understand. Tell her I'll be there in time for a panel. And Harper asks Petra if she's okay to be by herself. And Harper says she has to go meet a friend. Petra just says, just remember we have an 8 a.m. So next scene, we now see Eric and Robert. And Robert asks if there's any sign of Frank. And as they're sitting there, Anna sees them and says, did you see that Morgan Stanley published on Lumi a very noisy sell? And Eric says, who cares about Morgan Stanley? Anna replies, well, why is the stock down 5% after market? I mean, I'm slightly worried about standing a panel with Henry tomorrow. We are going to look like goons if we are trumpeting an equity story that's getting pummeled. A few of my more skittish investors want me to fully unlever the fund's position in Lumi.
What it means to unlever a position, for those of you who don't know. So it doesn't mean that she's going to liquidate all of her holdings or go short. When hedge funds want to express a long view, it's typically either A, they borrow money to fund a levered long position, and or they express their longs vis-a-vis levered derivative structures, right? Mm-hmm. So when you use leverage, it has a multiplier effect, both when things are going well and when things go badly. So if you are concerned that things are about to turn, if you're not quite ready to totally bail on the position, what a hedge fund will classically do is they will unlever their positions to reduce that massive downside risk so you don't get those big swings. So you're going to forego the potential massive benefit, but you'll be a little more insulated. So it's a 1-to-1 type risk rather than, again, like I said earlier, a 20-to-1 or a 50-to-1 or, more reasonably here, like probably like 5 or 10-to-1.
Yeah. So someone comes in and interrupts. It's the CFO of Europa Gas. And Eric shakes his hand and says, we're honored to be taking you public. And the CFO replies, let's hope your investment bank due diligence has sharpened since the Lumi deal. Now it's kind of interesting that he's saying I hope that you do your due diligence on us more.
I hope you look at me more critically. I mean, it's funny because the first time I heard it, I had the same reaction as you. Well, okay, but also wouldn't you want everything to be so favorable for me? But when you think about it, right? We talked about that Figma IPO, how it was priced so low relative to where it traded on the follow, and how that wasn't necessarily a good thing that it went up massively. We know it's much more obviously a bad thing if the stock totally craps out after an IPO. So I would have phrased it a little differently, I think, for the average listener, being okay, due diligence. I hope you go through my earnings and all of my statements with a more fine-tooth comb to find flaws. But what he really should have said is I hope you sharpen your pencils rather than do more due diligence, because diligence has this, I think, aura to it of almost that you're going to find bad things if you do proper due diligence. So I just didn't care for that wording choice, but I understand what he meant. I just wouldn't have chosen those words.
Yeah. So Eric says, can I expect you on our panel tomorrow? And the CFO says, front and center, don't disappoint me. So the next scene is the scene that traumatized Jen. So we are
not traumatized, but I did have to look away. It was just, I always forget that HBO is always such a jump scare with full frontal nudity.
Right. So Robert and Frank are in a sauna, and Robert is sitting there and he says, hi, Frank. No, it's not the most appropriate time to introduce myself, but I'm Robert Spurring, as they're literally sitting there buck naked. Or actually Robert isn't,
Robert
but Frank is.
Towel.
Yeah. Fair. And so Frank says, yes, I know. We have a WhatsApp group where we share the directory of photos of all the hottest and straightest employees at Pierpoint. And so Robert says, I know we're all waiting.
This is wildly inappropriate.
Yes. Robert says, we're all waiting on your report with bated breath. You're not going to publish a sell on Lumi for the conference tomorrow. Frank says, I'm going to do what I always do, the thing that is ethical and intellectually correct. Plus,
after he just sexually harassed the guy next to him, by the way.
Yes. Well, they're in a sauna together. He says, plus it's a compliance issue, and I really love me some compliance. So this, I think, makes Robert feel better.
Robert seems totally satisfied with this answer, and he seems to think that whatever threat Frank posed has been neutralized. Yes. I didn't get that off of this, but you can see it in Robert's face that he's fine. I took this to be Frank is says one thing and does another, considering he's just I'll do the ethically and morally correct thing. Plus, I'm worried about my comp. Plus, I'm sexually harassing you while you're sitting next to me. What? I don't trust this guy as far as I can throw him. And I'm also looking away as he's fondling himself.
Yeah. I said to Jen, I was like, is there anything scary in this whole episode? And she was like, yes. I just was not ready for this. Okay. So anyway, now next scene, we're outside and we're at this mixer that Otto is throwing. And so Otto says, talking to Henry, he says, my initial impression of this conference is it's like Cannes, except the attendees are richer, uglier, and somehow more insecure than movie people. Now, Aurora comes up to Otto and says, hi. So we now know that there is this relationship between Aurora and Otto.
But also, what does Otto do? I must have missed some really critical exposition or something. I had this issue in the first episode. I had this issue in the second episode, and I'm having this issue now. Like, Otto Moston has not been properly defined for me. He's just this nebulous rich guy who seems to be all powerful. And he's also always accompanied by other random elderly British guys. And I can't tell them apart. And I don't know what they do.
One of
I'm
whom
so
is,
sorry.
yeah, well, one of whom is Henry's uncle. And then now
and
some other random
guy, right? And that's who's standing next to him. Is that Peter?
I mean, it also, no, Peter is different. Peter is different. We meet him later. Yeah, Peter is not
is
newspaper
so
guy.
confusing to me. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's got newspaper guy next to him. So it's Henry's godfather and Henry's uncle. One of whom is the newspaper guy, and Otto is the godfather. And we don't know what he does, but he has tons of money, and he's everywhere all of a sudden.
Yes. I mean, I think that you're not necessarily supposed to know who he is, and I don't think that it ever really gets explicitly said. Well, remember, he
called the trading floor, and Yaz picked up because he was calling her, and Eric was like, which PM? So it would have been nice if they just established whatever Boston Capital
or whatever.
Is Rocos Capital, right? Like, that would have done me so many favors. And there was like very critical missing exposition. I can't place him in.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of like a Peter Thiel, right? I think he's just one of these people, and they never formally say it, but you get the pieces of it. And I think that that's part of it too, is I don't know how much Harper knows about who he is, but I mean, so I don't know. Again, I don't know. I don't know if this was like purposely supposed to be.
I'm excited to talk about him because he's big in this episode in a way that was like meaningful to me. So I'm excited to talk about him, but unfortunately there are shortcomings in my analysis because I just don't fully internalize who he is.
Yeah. So Yaz is there with her champagne next to Henry, and the people who were on the plane, that like terrible dude, keeps trying to look at Yaz and figure out who she was, or specifically that one awful guy.
But also the fact that Aurora's here, by the way. Like, I thought Aurora was in healthcare. So something has changed. Like,
no. She's never been in healthcare. She's some conservative member in the UK government, and at one point was like on the healthcare committee. Right. I think for some deal it was going to go through. But I remember her background was in, I believe it was debt capital markets at Pierpoint. And then she became in government.
Sorry, when I said in healthcare, I meant like in the healthcare oriented space in government. Like,
but I don't know that there even is one. I don't actually, I mean, like, think about the US government. Like, you can get put on different committees, but you're not like the healthcare person. It's not like we had that conversation with Sarah.
That's a really good point. I think I just don't fully understand the UK government also.
Well, I would think, I mean, and I could be wrong, but I think she's just getting put on different committees, like as there's different deals that are going through or big things that are happening. And so that's what is going on here. So she was working on some healthcare stuff. She's working on some green energy stuff.
That makes sense. I mean, that's clearly what she's doing here. I just didn't know that like that's how it worked, that you could just be like, oh, I'm on all these different committees. But
but that's how it is in the US. Like, it's just like, I want to be on the intelligence committee, right? Why do you get put on it? I mean, literally you can have random people that got put on these committees despite no background. And I think you can be on a bunch of them. So I think that's more what it is. So anyway, she is a conservative, and they're talking to both Henry's uncle and the godfather. And Aurora says, every meeting I have is about these impending natural gas prices and whether you're going to be passing those on to our consumer, because lots of my constituents signed up for Lumi services. And so I literally have a note here. I'm like, it's interesting that Aurora is cozying up to these guys, specifically like Otto and Henry's uncle, just because there's something sinister about them that, I mean, not that I ever thought that Aurora was this do-gooder, but
no, not at all. Remember when she like totally, no, she's sinister.
Yeah. I actually really like her character, but it's just...
Yeah, she's great. She's super nuanced. Like, no, to me, they're all in the same bucket. It's okay. Here are the people who are pulling all the strings.
Like, they're the Illuminati. So Yaz, you can tell, does not want to be at this mixer. She doesn't want to be part of these conversations. Like, she just wants out. So she walks away for a smoke. And the guy from the plane, like terrible dude, comes over and says to her, are you avoiding me? And she says no, but then asks if his family office has any sales and trading coverage, thinking like, whatever, I'll try to get
a professionally oriented conversation with him. Like, hey, do you need someone to cover you for FX? Like,
and he replies instead back to her looks, you're alluring and elusive. And she just goes, not intentionally. And then he says, oh, you're staying at the Grand? My parents own it. I'm DJing in the basement tomorrow. Those statements are not related, but you should come with, and we can discuss whatever you want to discuss there. She says, maybe someday. And then the guy then says that he's a pretty good reader of people and that she looks sad. She's then finally just like, I'm not interested. And he replies, I gathered you'd open your legs for a bottle of 1942, given your situation. So she now knows.
So horrible. He knows who she is. He's hitting on her. And when she rejects his advances, he then makes fun of her position in life after literally trumpeting the only thing that he was going for him is that he's a trust fund kid. This guy is so terrible and so cartoonishly terrible. And just like, hard pass.
Yep. No, he's awful. So next scene, this is the best. This is the
Best
one that I know,
scene.
Jen, you love. Robert and Eric are in bed together. Eric has those little, like, those patches under his eyes to, like, make him look younger. He's in his robe. And Robert tells Eric that he was right about Frank, that he's a company man. And Eric says, told you, a shame about the snow, because he wanted there to be snow, and there's apparently no snow. Eric then asked what the story between him and Yaz, which I thought was wildly inappropriate.
No, stop. So Robert tells Eric not to worry about Frank, says he's a company man. He's going to support Lumi because that's what's going to make the most money for Pierpoint, right?
Yeah.
Eric now feels relieved and can kind of get back to like his little worries in life, right? Because he's like, I told you. And his mind keeps going to the snow, right? His mind is elsewhere. He's like, why isn't this what I expected? So it's funny because like the second the looming crisis that he was worried about is managed in his mind, the first thing he references is the actual climate change that they're there to talk about. And so meanwhile, it cuts to the TV. It's a silent movie. Why they are sitting in bed watching a silent movie together is like next level. And so it cuts from the image to the text. And the text reads, I've inspected all the lady employees and not one of them has it. It in all caps. So now we see our title for the episode. And it's like, okay. This is where you're supposed to pay attention. So upon seeing this, Eric then says, what's the story with you and Yaz? So when you're talking about all the lady employees, Yaz is the only female employee in this little episode in Eric's world. She's desperate to prove she has it. It being business acumen and value to offer the firm. But the it being referenced here in this old school black and white movie likely isn't her business acumen. It's it. It's the look. She's special. So for Eric's mind to immediately go there, that's what it is to him. It is that female, she's beautiful, she's magical, she's alluring, not it is the business acumen. And so that's why his mind goes to, okay, what's the story with you and Yaz to Robert, implying that they're dating.
Got it. Okay. That all makes so much more sense. So he then also reads something about the conference and he says, the maximum amount of money doing the maximum amount of good. Can you believe the BS coming off of that? Which is that theme throughout the whole episode.
He's reading from his prepared remarks that he's now prepared.
Oh, I thought that this was like the motto of the conference. Yeah.
That's what I thought too. It could be either way, but he then says the line himself.
Right.
Like the way he delivers that line on the panel makes it seem like that was him landing the plane. So my first read, I thought it was him reading a brochure for the conference.
That's what I thought.
So it might be both. But
no, again, I like yours better that he's reading his prepared remarks, trying to
That's
prep.
what I thought the second time around. So it could be either. I'm totally open to either interpretation. But by the way, so Robert says that he and Yaz are just roommates. And to be honest, like this plot point is so dead for me. Like the Robert Yaz thing. I wanted it to happen so badly in season 1 and maybe a little in season 2. I find it tough to imagine that after all this time, Robert is still carrying a torch for Yasmin. And I don't imagine that she feels anything for him. I just don't see it in their characters' interactions. Maybe I'm wrong. But like
it comes back in the later. Oh, okay. And I actually like what they did with it. I mean, we'll see if you like it, but
because I'd emotionally stopped out on it. I'm over it. So they're gonna bring it back. I don't know it's gonna land with me.
Well, it reminds me a little of like Ross and Rachel and Friends, where I mean, but like X-rated. But it's like Ross and Rachel and Friends, where they date and they whatever, and then they get over it, and then they're friends for a while, but then they ultimately and like there's a bunch of episodes in between where there's absolutely no chemistry whatsoever, but they're friends. But then ultimately, like, they keep getting back together, have a baby, then are not together, then whatever. So I will say that plot point will come back. Okay. And I think that they did a decent job with it because, Okay, so now next scene, we're back outside with Yaz talking to Otto. She's so miserable. She walks away, sees Harper, is so relieved, gives her a hug. And Yaz says, I'm so alone. And Harper then says, can you introduce me to Otto? And Yaz is like, can it wait? And Harper pushes Yaz to do it and she agrees.
This is so tragic, by the way, because they've been reintroducing the friendship between Yaz and Harper this season. And you know how much I like want that friendship to happen and to be good. And And Yaz is so lonely and so desperate for a friend. And Harper's like, hey, yeah, cool story, Hansel. So can you do me a favor? I'm all business, right? And in Harper's defense, like she's on a limited time window, whatever.
Yeah.
So it actually does make sense that she's like, you got to wait because I am here doing covert operations. This is super important. But as far as like the overall Yaz Harper arc, it's
well, I actually do think Harper wants what's best for Yaz, but also nobody's going to get in the way of Harper and Harper.
Yeah, never at Harper's expense. Never if it costs Harper
it's
1
always
second
Harper
of her
number
time.
one.
Yep.
But I do think that she clearly cares about Yaz and she does want to do the right thing. But I need this, so I'm going to make sure that I prioritize myself, and then we can come back and like make sure that you're okay. But right now, I need this thing. So I love this. When Yaz makes the introduction to Otto, his response to meeting Harper is, "Who invited you?" And Harper is like, "Why don't you think I'm impressive enough to make the list?" And he replies, "Because she's a diminutive woman." Henry's uncle then says, "Well, climate change would be solved if women were in charge." And Harper replies, "I prefer the kind of feminism where women can be cunts. Like, I don't like this performative BS, like you telling me climate change would be solved if women were in charge. I like it more where like you're going to treat me the exact same way you treat a guy and tell me I'm an asshole when I'm being an asshole. Don't try to spin this on me." So I actually kind of liked that. Yeah. So Yaz is about to say that Harper works at Future Dawn when Harper jumps in and says, "I used to be a trader at Pierpoint." Aurora then recognizes her and says, "We met at that shoot with Jesse Bloom." Or can we no longer say his name out loud? So, okay, what happened with Jesse Bloom? Harper then says, "I'm a trader now, a PM. I'm pitching a new fund." Yaz looks stunned. And Otto says, "ESG?" Harper says no. Otto says, "Well, I would choose your audience carefully. You wouldn't believe how strong an opiate politics is. Even convinces some people that they're happy losing money." And so, Jen, I wanted to just pause on that because the fact that she says that she was a trader at Pierpoint, I mean, she was a salesperson. And while it might seem like a minor distinction, and by the way, I actually sometimes get annoyed that like sales is so much more than what it sounds like, if that makes sense. Like people are so much smarter. Well, but it's true. You think of a regular salesperson selling you whatever it is, like a used car, but the amount of knowledge and market acumen, and you always say a lot of people who are salespeople do go on to become traders and PMs and very successful on the buy side.
Path is not unusual for a salesperson.
Right. But she technically was not a trader.
She was not a trader. Period. Right. Full stop.
So,
although
but
they do have this like FX sales trading thing happening where she was executing, but like 100%. And you and I have talked about this, about the hierarchies on Wall Street and like just in life in general, where people sometimes find themselves feeling like they need to overstate what their role was to get legitimacy. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a difference between you and I kind of cosplaying, right? We'll make a silly reel on Instagram and I'll be like, I'm a private equity partner at Apollo or whatever. I never worked at Apollo, didn't know Apollo from a hole in the wall when I was on the street. Just like, no, we're acting out skits versus speaking from your personal lived experience. And I think that there is something that I really want to be able to portray accurately that I think the show does a really good job of is this feeling that when you're at a cocktail party, you need to phrase what you did in the sexiest way possible, but for whom? For whose benefit? It's really only ever for yours. Her telling Otto that she was a trader at Pierpoint and that she's now a junior portfolio manager when she has never had a P&L line item next to her name in her life. She wants him to take her seriously by positioning herself that way. And I get it, because in the overall hierarchy of finance, if she's asking to raise capital for a new fund from Otto, which is what she clearly is finagling towards, if she's like, I was a salesperson, now I'm starting my own fund, it sounds less impressive than I was a trader who was a risk taker, now starting my own fund. Even though the reality is that salespeople go start their own funds, become portfolio managers. Some of the former salespeople I worked with, like I said, are the biggest names on the street on the buy side, controlling capital. But it's something that bothers us when we see it, when we see people misrepresenting themselves and overstating their role to sound more whatever it is, right? And Kristen, I think you're the opposite. I feel like you're always downplaying what you did. There is this thing where two things can be true at the same time, right? You can be very proud of your experience and of what your role was and still talk in general terms. You worked at the investment bank, right? But you also aren't saying, I was a private equity partner. You're saying, I taught at these private equity firms and I taught these junior people coming in how to do their jobs. Like, there's no mistaking what you did or didn't do. You're very accurate on that. And I think that it's then frustrating when you see people like lying by omission or giving the impression that they worked in a role that they didn't. And Harper is very guilty of that here. She is just flat out lying.
Yeah.
And I just want to make that distinction. This is why Yasmin is suddenly like wide-eyed because she's like, huh?
Well, and this is why we love to do these recaps of the show, because your average viewer is not going to be like, oh, she wasn't a traitor. I mean, I think it's one of these things where like, she worked at Pierpoint. Cool, cool. But that means such a specific thing to say, I was a traitor at Pierpoint. It is, to your point, a lie. And it is overstating what she did, even though back to that whole initial point that like, there is something so infuriating about the fact that a salesperson who is working in her seat is called a salesperson because their actual role and intellect is so much more than what you think about as a generic salesperson. And so I understand that. It's like Mike from Suits, right? He's not a lawyer. He didn't go to law school. And although I do think he passed the bar, but that's a whole separate conversation. So anyway,
I love this defense of salespeople from you. This is like bringing a tear to my eye.
True. But yeah.
But I will say too, Harper is heartened by Otto's response because those words that he just said about people let politics fool them into being comfortable losing money, those words could just have easily come directly from Petra. So it's very clear that whatever Harper's trying to do, she's barking up the right tree with these guys.
100%. So the plane guy then comes back over and says to Yaz, so is your dad really on the run or did you kill him or something? Jesus. Harper is there looking stunned and just goes, what? Henry comes into her defense and is like, what the fuck? And Yaz, of course, goes away. And you can hear this horrible guy saying, you realize that Charlie Hanani is her dad. So Henry runs after her saying like, Yaz. And she's like, were you gossiping about me? And Henry is like, he's just such a effing. And then he's like, I'm not going to use that word. It's not PC. And he tells her that he did tell this guy her name, which he apologizes for, that he's like, I shouldn't have done that. And Yaz just goes, can I leave now? Like in a professional capacity. And Henry says, you weren't here in a professional capacity. And Yaz is like, I effing was. So she then runs off and Harper goes after her. And this whole thing with her dad, like is literally breaking her. And she says, is it bad that I miss him? Like, I don't understand. How can I miss him if I hated him? And she says, maybe I didn't. Maybe I never hated him. And then you have flashbacks to what happened on the boat with him, like essentially assaulting her. So disgusting. And Harper says, well, at least you had the privilege of having a father to F you up. Then she realizes like, this is so not helpful. So she apologizes for even saying that. And she's like, look, this too shall pass. And Yaz is like, you're right. They hug. And so you see Harper coming to her aid as being this supportive friend, trying to help her through whatever the shitstorm is going on with her dad. And trying to be there to support her. And by the way, like realizing, hey, I shouldn't make this about me. I feel like this is the first time she's ever realized, like, I need to be less narcissistic and just like let her have her moment. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting that she started to like try to go in and like on herself and then was like, yeah, no, this isn't helping.
I do think it is an interesting data point though, which will come into play shortly, of kind of this, okay, what's your dad's story? What's your dad trauma? Yasmin's got her dad trauma and Harper's like, well, what about my dad trauma? And Yasmin's like, the two are not, we're not competing, right? This isn't a race to be who suffered more from the tragedy of not having a great father figure in their life. And I think it's just interesting that that's immediately where Harper goes when Yaz is thinking about that. So we'll see a very different reaction from Yasmin to someone else. But by the way, I love a montage. The next scene we get is this amazing montage of the following morning, Petra and Harper's wildly unsuccessful investor meetings.
Yes. Well, it starts with this young girl who's maybe 20 looking at an iPad, not even looking up to look at them as they're trying to pitch their fund. You then see these other investors who are trying to say that they are managing the Church of England's money. You see all these people just like totally disinterested in what they're doing. And by the way, the Church of England money is like so not a fit because like they're clearly very into doing good. We also find out that Petra studied engineering at MIT, and then she spent 2 years at CERN, which I looked up was like some European organization for nuclear research.
CERN is where the Large Hadron Collider is. So they like shoot particles through this thing that's literally buried under the Swiss Alps. It's the coolest thing in the world. It is the European Center for Nuclear Research.
But so it's clear that she's brilliant.
When they're pitching the fund, though. So yes, we do get this insight into Petra's character that she is super scientific. She's a you, right? She's like, I'm an engineer. It's black and white. Everything's cut and dry, up, down, left, right, right? So the way they're pitching themselves is an event-driven equity long short with a macro overlay. And Petra says, I'm the seasoned stock picker. And Harper is a talented macro trend analyzer. Analyzer? Like, okay, all right, we'll go with that word, I guess. But so all of a sudden, everything is shifting. It was, hey, we're going to go to this thing and we're going to have you, Petra, this is your fund, and I'm just selling it. To now all of a sudden, we're a team. And they're getting deeper and deeper in bed together as this pitch kind of evolves subtly through their language and what they're talking about. So I think that that's very interesting. And I do think it's funny that the reaction of both of these potential investors could not be less interested. The junior girl says, I'm just here as a courtesy. And I think it's really important that juniors try to build their own networks. And the girls are like,
how good for you.
Yeah, like exactly. How nice. And Petra literally throws a Hail Mary, pun intended, and tells the church money managers that this is an opportunity for them to make some serious money. She says, let's get Jesus out of those sandals and into some Jordans. You'll get proper returns dressed in whatever politics you like. I wanted to crawl under my couch and hide. It like, this is, I mean, she could not be less adept at marketing this fund.
Well, but it was so clear because it was so clear that she didn't care. They were like, what do you think of Lumi? She's like, it's a dog with fleas. And then they say to her, there's a lot of ESG funds here that are looking to raise money. What's your edge? And then I forget if it was Harper or Petra who says, we're going to be less dogmatic. And the woman replies, that word is doing a lot of work. So she can't fake it, right, either, to try to raise money. She's like, this is what we want to do. And so the final person that comes in essentially tells them, I don't care what you guys say. If you don't have returns, if you can't show me your performance and your history, you can't raise money. So they realize that somehow—
Petra's reaction is like, oh no, that's just a rubber stamp. Like, you'll see my track record when you're all the way down the road in due diligence after we're already in bed together. And he's like, no, your returns are the only way you get interest in the first place, which is 100% true, by the way. Like, they're going out there being like, don't you believe in us? And it's like, I don't know. Who are you? I don't know you from a hole in the wall. Right. And so Petra says she didn't put in a request to find out what her returns were because like elevating that would have raised red flags. I mean, it's shocking to me because as someone who's married to a trader, like the idea that he spends any waking moment of his life not knowing exactly what his P&L is. Right. I mean, 24 hours do not go by without him knowing what his P&L is. So like being able to show someone a document with that, like, okay, but he could tell you off the bat, like, how much money did he make in, I mean, the year.
And probably what other people made too.
100%.
That's the other thing. People
100%.
know every single thing. They know what they made. They know what the other people's made. They know how much money then they got paid. Like, they know everything. Yep. So 100%. This is a plot point. This is a hurdle.
So Harper says, why didn't you just take a picture off your compliance person's computer screen? And Petra goes, I don't think that's legal. Okay, well, you can see the wheels turning in Harper's brain because, like, by the book legal procedure isn't exactly Harper's strong suit. And these
Remember they were taking pictures of everything when they were trying to leave Pierpoint?
100%. Yeah. So these two both told the line with ethics, but apparently this is a bridge too far for Petra. You can immediately see the wheels turning in Harper's mind.
Yeah. So as they're having this conversation, Harper sees Anna and Eric walking together because remember, they're about to be on a panel. And Harper pushes Petra because she wants to hide. And Petra's just like, what the F? Like, and Harper says, oh, I'm sorry I pushed you. Just seeing them together freaked me out. And this makes Petra second guess what she's doing. And she's like, maybe it is not wise for me to start again. And then it's just like, I have to get to Anna's panel. The reason it makes her second guess
is because it's like, listen, it's one thing to go out and like try to poach someone's investors, but being like cloak and dagger about it and to this extent where you're like jumping into an alcove to avoid someone, she's like, this is just a little sophomoric for me. What she doesn't know is that it's not about seeing Anna. It's about seeing Eric for Harper. Yeah. Like Harper would happily just as well walk up to Anna and punch her in the face. She doesn't care. So she's starting to suspect that Harper is more volatile and more
sneaky,
mercurial than someone she'd necessarily want to be in business with. Because as much as Petra is like not doing great things here with respect to Anna, she's doing the logical thing based on the set of, I think, circumstances set before her. Whereas Harper isn't always acting logically. She is acting.
She's a loose cannon. I mean,
she is wild, which we will get to.
Yes. All right. So next scene, we see Yaz, who's just in bed with like a face mask on, and Harper calls
she's
her
in
asking
like
what
a
she's up
parallel
to.
outfit to Eric with the face mask on her head.
Yeah.
She's watching trashy TV, which I just
Yes.
love.
Yeah. So Harper tells her that she's in a bit of a jam and is like, did you happen to see Petra's returns when you were covering Anna's fund? Like back when she covered Future Dawn. And Yaz is like, no. She says, but one of their new hires, Sweet Pea Go Lightly, which we just found out her last name, like, oh dear Lord, she did a rotation in PAM, Pierpoint Asset Management. So she'll know someone junior there. And so then Harper asks if she can get screenshots.
Because Pierpoint Asset Management is invested in Future Dawn. That's why they would have their returns.
Right. Sorry. Yes. But so Harper asks if she can get screenshots of Petra's track record. And Yaz says she'll do it. But if she does, she wants the fund's commission next to her name. And so Harper
Meaning
is like,
she'd be lead sales coverage on their account.
Exactly. Like she wants to get credit when they need to trade and do stuff. And Harper says, bitch, you know I always wanted you to work for me. So now we know that Yaz
isn't exactly a joke. Like
No,
she always wanted Yaz either under her or out of her way. And I think it's no coincidence that they're having this conversation, by the way, while in the background, like, right, they're going tit for tat with favors from one another. You hear the girls on Yaz's reality TV show calling each other slimy ass hoes. Like Harper and Yasmin, their friendship has never worked in the professional realm. And so I think it's important to remember back to just how problematic their relationship was when they were actually working together. And now it's like, oh my God, great. We're going to work together again. Yaz is so excited. She hangs up the phone and is like, yay, in her little like robe and face mask. And she's now happy again because she thinks that Harper is recognizing her for her professional capabilities. She's like, this is great. I'm now going to be lead sales coverage on this hot new fund. My bestie's got the hookup. Like, this is going to be awesome. That's what she's thinking.
Yeah.
We know better, but we'll get to that.
All right. So now next scene, they're all on stage at this panel. And so it is Eric, Henry, Anna, right from Future Dawn, and then the moderator. And so they start talking about the story and the history and blah, blah, blah. It's all BS.
Eric
It's
is
all
like blowing smoke up Henry's ass, right?
Yes.
It is all just word salad.
Yeah. And as Eric is up there talking, there's an alert that says Pierpoint has published a hold recommendation from Frank Wade. And they're up there talking, and it's like, da, da, da. You see Robert look at his phone. He sees all the different banks and their various like buy, sell, hold recommendations. And basically almost everything is hold and sell. There's like two buys who were probably the other underwriters on the deal. And he leans over to Yaz and tells her what happened. And she's just like, oh, F me. So
meanwhile, in the back, in the audience, Harper has come in and she is sitting a few rows behind Petra. Petra does not see her.
So they then continue talking. And the one thing that I thought was interesting is the moderator asks about, what do you think of the UK government's commitments to net zero? And Henry says, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. We work very closely with the UK government and Aurora's been a huge champion. So just important. Anyway, so they then say, let's actually throw some questions to the audience. And so the first guy comes out and says, the high number of sell recommendations from banks that didn't do the Lumi IPO is quite telling. He says, the rally in natural gas, is this a panel or a funeral? And Henry says, this isn't the World Economic Forum. He says WEF, but World Economic Forum. We're here to talk about the climate catastrophe. And Eric says, do any of us look like we're at a funeral? Then the next person who gets up to ask a question is Harper. Which is like, what?
And she introduces herself as a macro trader and junior PM. So now we've gone all the way from, I was a trader at Pierpoint to now, basically, I'm Chris Rocos.
Well, so but it's not only just that. She also says she and Petra have come to COP to launch their new fund. Who's on the freaking panel? I mean, is Anna. So she is totally outing Petra. It's like, oh my God. So she's basically trolling Eric. She is outright effing over Petra.
Blazing. Her question, by the way, didn't even make sense.
Well, and let me read her question. She says, why is Pierpoint holding this ideas festival in the shadow of a climate conference? We have a green energy CEO, a senior PM of a green leading fund, and a random salesman from an American investment bank. By the way, notice how she says salesman here when she previously called herself a trader. They had the exact same role. But she says,
a good call out.
Is this just the media financial complex just patting itself on the back? And clearly your sales coverage must be moot, given your research analyst.
Sales patter. Sales patter is like what Eric was doing when he was like blowing off the person who called it a funeral.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so clearly your sales patter must be moot, given your research analyst, Frank Wade at PeerPoint, has just published a hold on Lumi, and given you're the lead underwriter, that is tantamount to a sell. I guess the gentleman who said funeral didn't misspeak. And then Henry leans over and says, effing thing is down 15%. So Eric leans forward and says, we are a financial institution that is trying to do good. Whether we like it, not every debate is linked. It starts and ends with capital. The moderator leans over and he claps and he's like, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everybody.
And before Eric is done speaking, while he's trying to do more word salad damage control, the CEO of Europa Gas, who was right there in the front, his name is Olaf, which I love, walks out.
Because of the snowman?
I just think
Frozen?
they're really trying to signal that he's like this like Scandi guy. But I like, there you go. You got the snow connection again, which is I didn't think about that.
So then as they all walk out, Harper sees Petra and Anna having obviously a heated discussion because she just threw Petra under the bus. And then someone comes up behind Harper and asks if she has a marketing deck for their new fund. So it's this guy with white hair. We haven't met him yet. And he says, it's refreshing to hear.
Again, with my like,
you're like with your face blindness.
I was like, is this the newspaper guy?
No, it's not. It's just we hadn't met him yet.
Okay,
so
great.
Yeah, so he says, it's refreshing to hear a dissenting voice that sounds like the one in my head. And Harper tells him that they're working on it. He asks if the fund has a name. And when she hesitates, he says, oh, that's a good place to start. And then he walks away. So I think like in my head, I'm like, oh shit, she just blew up her chance. They probably should have at least come up with a fun name, but whatever. No. So then the next thing, they're up in the hotel room. Petra is just yelling at her. She's like, what the F is wrong with you? Harper says,
and she's packing her bags. She's like, yes. This is over.
Yeah. So Petra's like going to go back to London. And Harper asks, well, what were you going to do? Sit in that fund, make a salary, passively accruing fees? You were an intellect. You deserve autonomy. And Petra's like, well, you should check a dictionary because you just tried to make this decision for me, right? She tried to take that out of Petra's hands and expose her so that she didn't have a choice. So
totally.
She tells her,
Harper is such anonymous. She's anonymous, such a narcissist. She's like, aren't you glad I blew up your life?
Yeah.
It was all for you so you could be more independent. No, it wasn't. It was all for you, Harper. Like, stop.
Yeah. So Petra says that she's made a huge mistake and she says, serves me right for getting involved with a child. But then there's a knock on the door and Harper's like, whatever, I'm going to go get it. And we see that same white-haired man who had followed her ask like what their name was. And then in the scene comes Otto, who walks in saying, fortune, good night, smile once more, turn thy wheel, which Jen, I have no idea what that means. So I'm going to let you explain. I assume there's some literary reference here.
There is. So this whole next scene is just an English major's dream. Although embarrassingly, like, even though I was an English literature major, I don't love Shakespeare. And when it comes to Shakespeare, King Lear is not my strong suit. So this is a quote from King Lear. I had to look it up because I was like, I know this is a quote from something. I might as well look it up. That is not one of the Shakespearean plays I love and am most familiar with. And it's like the English major's dream play. I know it's just not my thing. But anyways, so basically the reference is someone down on their luck who is hoping for things to finally turn around and go their way. The term Wheel of Fortune did not originate from that. I at least know that. Okay, so the term Wheel of Fortune.
Fun fact, Jen's mom was on Wheel of Fortune back in the day.
She was, yes, and she won.
Yeah.
But so the term dates back to like ancient Rome. So the goddess Fortuna has a wheel that she spins. But anyways, so he is basically saying, good news, everyone, I'm here, with that line.
Okay, he walks in. Then the next scene, you see them just all sitting down. And he says, all the companies parading around here are really only interested in their bottom line exposure as the world heats up. Petra says, look, I'm not saying BlackRock doesn't want to affect change. It's just they want to use its proxy votes to push whatever political agenda it has. But in the cold light of day, I bet their investors don't give a shit about activism, or they're deluded enough to think it's actually going to earn them an actual return. By the way, this is one of the arguments that people have or issues with BlackRock is that they do get to vote on behalf of the investors who are buying into their ETF and don't want to make a decision about whatever the thing that comes to the shareholder vote. So they basically say, you can vote on our behalf. And there is criticism that, BlackRock then can push their agenda, whatever their agenda is, because they have the ability to vote on behalf of all these people. So Otto then says, look, I'm not a climate denier. I find that crowd rather Neanderthal. But if Venice ends up in the seabed in 2075, who cares? It's a shithole in the summer, and I don't intend to be here to see it sink. All right, let's get down to brass tacks.
This conversation for me, by the way, encapsulates everything that was so wrong with peak ESG. It's like everyone was pretending to be an activist. So this whole thing that Petra says, her line specifically was, I'm not saying BlackRock doesn't want to affect change when it uses its proxy votes to push whatever political agenda it has. Meaning, okay, everyone's pretending to be an activist and pretending to be motivated only by good. And the gotcha moment is that, oh no, you're really motivated by profit. And to your point earlier, right? After the conversation we just had with Sarah, it's like, dude, the brightest minds in the world are incorporating climate science and wargaming the most complex scenario analyses in the world using the most sophisticated technology, the brightest scientific minds, right? There is a very real world where hedging against extreme weather or agriculture changing or accessing fuel sources or whatever it is, it's not only the prudent thing to do, but it's also a profitable one. It doesn't have to be this absurd greenwashing where everything is so noble, but maybe it's saying, hey, listen, I want a different source of energy or water or whatever it is, so I don't have to go to war with my neighbor, by the way. Like, okay, this isn't a terrible thing to be talking about the finite resources of the world and how we use them, but there's tremendous nuance to it because this is human nature. So when you get to this, it's you're either with us or against us mentality. You can see how people are like, you know what? Fine, screw you. I am going to be against you because I can't convince you any differently. And what Otto is saying is he's like, look, I'm a cynic, but I'm not a savage. And I think that's where he comes down and he's like, I want to make money. I don't really care either way about this climate thing, but let's call it a spade a spade. Okay, you don't care. Maybe some people do. That's great.
Well, but that's actually so, I think, important. It's like we had that conversation with Sarah who said all of the PhDs who came out of my program where she was studying like atmospheric stuff, blah, 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 were hired by Citadel and Millennium. They are not hiring people because they want to do good. They're hiring people because they know that it's going to make them an F ton of money. If you're investing in some coastal property, you need to know what is the risk that it's going to get wiped out. Like, what is the potential return you can get by investing in cat bonds, either because you want to protect yourself or, by the way, because you think like I can be a lender in that and I can make money. And because also, by the way, you need people who want to give insurance. So all of this stuff has to be priced appropriately. And that's what makes a market is people figuring out what is the right amount of money I should get paid for this risk. And so back to the point that Robert had made, like, if we want to figure out a way out of this mess, it is going to be financial. And by the way, there's a lot of, again, the good technologies where, I mean, honestly, it seems like Henry didn't really have a plan except for being like, let's hope that natural gas prices don't go up. But there's also startups where they're doing clean concrete or hopefully cold fusion one day and like
cold
building
fusion is not happening,
plants.
by the way. To be clear, cold fusion is a joke on
but
my point.
You know
like,
what I mean?
Yeah.
The point though is Elon Musk is the richest person in the world. People were buying Teslas because they thought it was a cool freaking car and it wasn't super expensive. So there's ways to do it. And by the way, make a lot of money. I have heard a number of people speculate that the person who quote unquote solves climate change is going to be the world's first trillionaire. So the problem with the way that things got spun with ESG, it's like if you're not investing, you're a bad person. And then of course you have the pendulum always swings so far instead of being like, let's be a realist and talk about the real risks that you could lose a lot of money, could make a lot of money. And that's what Otto's saying. He's like, look, I'm a pragmatist and I'm going to go where I can make money. And you guys seem like you have a good idea. So he says, all right, let's get down to brass tacks. We'd like to see your returns, Petra. And Petra's like, that's not possible right now. Harper says it is. They're on your email. Otto says, maybe Petra could take you through her last 5 years of numbers and see if her strategies live up to the billing.
Speaking to Peter, to his little second.
It's interesting that Petra and Peter, they're like two at the same.
I think it was not an accident at all, but who knows?
Interesting. Petra then gets up to go get her returns and Otto and Harper chat. And this is interesting too, because we find out some new information about our friend Jesse. So Otto says to Harper, after we spoke last night, I called a mutual friend currently residing in FCC Butler, North Carolina. And then he says later what that is. I had to look it up, but he literally says later what that is.
FCC stands for, I'm guessing, Federal Correction.
Yeah, because Harper asks, how is Jesse? And Otto replies, he's working on his putting. Butler is at the cushier end of federal correctional facilities.
Oh, got it.
Minor charges. God, he's like Al Capone. He's lucky. So I don't know what he did, but I mean.
Well, it's funny because I just assumed that he got charged with
insider trading.
when you said he wasn't coming back this season, I was really sad. But finding this out, I was like, oh, did he get charged for insider trading because of like what happened with the like, is it insider trading? Is it not insider trading at the end of last season? But it doesn't seem like Harper has suffered any fallout from it.
Right.
Or maybe it's because they fired her at Peer Point. So it was like, oh, CYA, she's gone.
I feel like it must be something worse because he says minor
totally
charges.
different.
God, he's like Al Capone. He's lucky. So to me, the insider trading thing is not good, but like a white collar criminal got some cushy FCC. Okay. By the way, I will say, and I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this, we don't necessarily find out what happened. At least
I keep wanting Jesse to come back because he was such a great
He
character.
might, by the way. Actually, again, I don't remember what happens, but he's brought up again later. I forget in what capacity. So I'm not spoiling anything because I just don't really even know or remember. He doesn't show up this season, but I mean, it possibly comes out next season. I don't know. By the way, season 4 has not come out yet. So this is why we're trying to rush to get this all done before January 11th when it comes out. So Harper then says, well, what did he say about me? Kind of like a little nervous that like, you know, and Otto says, oh, it says I inferred war against all.
Stop. Okay. Otto says it was mostly inferred. War of all against all. War of all against all. The Latin is bellum omnium contra omnes. This is a quote from Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan. So this whole episode gave me a run for my money as an English major. But for those of you who haven't read Leviathan, this is a great book for any like political studies or philosophy class. It was written during the English Civil War in the 1650s. And it was basically an argument for a really strong, unifying central government. So the basic premise is that mankind, by its nature, is this unruly, wild, self-serving, teeming mass of competing interests, so that everyone has to live in fear continuously. And it's just war of everybody against everybody at all times. That you would be willing to forego some of your freedom to submit to a central authority, to not have to live in fear constantly. So the term Leviathan is a biblical term. It refers to this like sea creature, which giant squid, by the way, that was Jesse back in whatever. But the reason that Thomas Hobbes chose that name for this theoretical ruler is the concept that it would be this super powerful and intimidating and like unchallengeable figure that otherwise like mere mortals can't contend with. So I think it's incredibly important that he introduces this concept in conversation with Harper, as she is now on the precipice of seizing power again if she can get a seed investment from him locked up for this fund with Petra. So that's why like I was like, stop.
Love that. Again,
incredibly
did not know why she, yeah. Okay. That's all I'm going to say.
So Otto says, you're a troublemaker, but Peter, my second in command, or whoever he is, the guy who's looking at Petra with her returns, was a troublemaker too. He says, you're one of us, you're one of the bandits. I didn't immediately place that phrase either. And my search turned up a bunch of different potential theories. Obviously, I'm going to go with the one that supports my thesis. So in the writings of St. Augustine, he tells the story of Alexander the Great capturing a pirate. And when he asks the pirate why he's out there robbing people on the ocean, the pirate says, when I do it with a small ship, you call me a robber or a bandit. Okay, so let's go with bandit. You call me a bandit. When you do it with a great fleet, you are called an emperor. Basically what he's saying is the only determinant of righteous power is morality. So there's no difference at face value in the actions of an evil pirate and a good-doing emperor in times of war, stopping criminals, right? Except the concept of justice and moral authority being done by one and not the other. So St. Augustine was a huge influence on Thomas Hobbes. So when you think about the Leviathan, right, this central government, it has to be inherently just and morally good. It can't just be stronger than everyone else. It has to be morally good. Otherwise, it's just a bigger bandit. And the only way that that central government authority and that power can be morally good is if that power is granted voluntarily by the people it governs. So this is my thesis, at least, that here we are with Harper, right? She has no power right now. But to gain power in this world that we inhabit in industry, she needs to be granted that power by either a boss who believes in her, right? And or by investors who are willing to grant her the authority to invest their money. So when she has those things, she has the endorsement of the investing community. And when she has like someone who's willing to help her along this path, right? Then suddenly she's going to skyrocket to power, at least, you know, in this world. The question is Harper, the Harper we know, inherently a just and morally good ruler when she's going to get that power? Never. Right? So now we have this Leviathan rising who is not inherently morally good. That's my thesis of this conversation with Otto. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like, I really hope I'm not, because if they were trying to accomplish even a fraction of this, it is brilliant writing.
Interesting. Next scene, we see Yaz. She's like in a bathing suit and she's about to try to go into a pool, but there's a little sign that says it's temporary closed. So Yaz looks confused, but she goes in anyway. And we see
Which
Henry
I
down
wouldn't do,
there.
by the way. I'd be like, why am I going to this place that's like closed?
Yeah,
for
seriously.
repairs?
Like, hell no. No. By the way, I hate indoor pools, but that's a whole other thing. So she walks in and says hi. And she says, I'm sorry, the panel got a little testy. She like gets
Henry
in the water.
in there.
Yeah, sorry. Well, we don't know that he's naked yet. We just know that Henry's in the pool by himself. And so he has clearly like closed off the the pool and has invited her. I assume he invited her. But anyway.
Oh, I figured she just wandered in there. I like that. It totally makes more sense that he would have invited her to come meet him. Yeah. Because I'm like, why is she just randomly wandering into an area that this tracks?
Well, I had assumed that as soon as like she walked in and he was there. Cause I mean, mostly because again, you would never catch me dead going into an indoor pool. So I assumed that someone had to invite her, but that's probably because I am so disgusted by indoor pools. But then again, it's funny. My brother is like a swimmer and he would definitely go try to swim. So
you maybe were like traumatized by indoor pools as a child.
Yeah, no, hate pools. But anyway, she's in her bathing suit. She goes into the water and as she's swimming towards him, she says, I'm sorry the panel got testy. And Henry replies, you have no idea how exhausting it is pretending nothing's wrong. He tells her the stock is down another 20%. And Yaz says, well, you still have your many millions if you sell your shares now before it goes to zero. And then she's like, come on, why would the lockup be so short? And Henry asks, do you really think you see me? I didn't buy into the image the media portrayed of you. I'd ask you to do me the same courtesy. So he tells Yaz that his dad, Reggie, one Sunday stood up from the table, left, and they found him 2 days later and he had shot himself. He says he didn't believe that he could do that until Jon Snow, right, Henry, started to have similar thoughts of his own his last year in school. He said that is how he finally made peace with the idea that his dad could end his own life. And he said that the way that he made peace with those thoughts, the suicidal ideations, was by building something of his own. Said he would do anything to avoid feeling that helpless again. Henry said that he is currently feeling, given everything that's going on, the worst he has felt since his dad died. And he hopes that Yaz finds peace faster than he did. He then says that it was incredibly selfish of him to arrange for her to come. So then making it clear that it was, although actually it could be coming to the conference. I thought maybe it was to the pool, but regardless, he says
I thought he meant to the conference. Yeah. Cause again, I didn't read that he had invited her to the pool.
But he says he thought he might get a minute alone with her and F it, anything would be worth that. Yaz then asks, what do you want me to do with that? She says, I haven't had sex in 5 months. And Henry replies, and you're still alive. He then like gives her a kiss on the cheek, then swims, gets out of the pool. Again, now we see he's buck naked and just then goes into the bathroom. And we'll come back to that.
With this scene, it's so funny. After the brilliantly written scene in Petra and Harper's room where they communicated so much with such economy of words, this scene didn't land for me. And thinking about this scene paired with the scene between Harper and Yaz, where it's like everyone talking about their traumas with their dads. Yeah. Like, I hate to say it, but the way this comes across is like, oh, you have a sob story? Well, here's my sob story about how I had to recover from so much psychologically. I dealt with suicidal ideation, but I built this company or whatever. You think you have it rough with your dad. I had it way rougher or whatever. This like, the only way that they are assigning this like moral compass to Henry is through this trauma. I wish that they had found some more nuanced way to make him seem worthy of us caring about him and wanting him to win, other than he had to overcome this trauma. Because Yasmin's trauma with her dad is like only part of her character, right? There's so much more that we've seen her grow through. This is really the only data point that we have about Henry, that he comes from this super privileged background. His dad killed himself, so he has these like high-powered financial people like Otto and newspaper uncle and whatever backing him. And I didn't like it. I just felt like it was like, oh, like here's my sob story about my dad. Like, don't you feel bad for me now?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I feel like we've talked about this before. There used to be Instagram reels that I would get shared where it was like, if you feel the need to talk about yourself when someone else shares something about them, that means you're a narcissist. And it's funny because like, I always want to try to share stuff to other people, mostly because I'm like, I want you to feel not alone. I think in the Harper example, I did think that was like narcissistic, but usually that's how people relate to each other is through shared experiences and commonalities. And so I'm with you, but I think for her, feeling like you're not the only one who has gone through that and like finding your community of other people who have had just like horrible shit happen can be helpful, but I hear you. But it's one of these things where there's
real life, this is a so much more nuanced thing. And I totally relate to what you're saying. Sharing, okay, you just told me your sad thing. Oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened to you. There is a very natural human impulse to be like, hey, this terrible thing happened to me and I made it through it and I'm okay. So you can learn from like how I dealt with it. But I know what it's like to be in your shoes and I'm empathizing, right? I totally get all of that. I feel like this was just lazy writing. Like, oh, she's got dad trauma, so he has dad trauma, and like, this is worse. That's all I really meant by that.
No, 100%. And I agree with you because I literally said that about Harper. That was always the criticism on some of these reels that was like, you're a narcissist, or you have ADHD, or like, you're on the spectrum if like your impulse is to want to like share an experience that you've had historically. And everyone's like, isn't that called relating to other people?
Well, there's a fine line between someone who's empathizing and someone who's a one-upper. Right?
That's true.
Oh my God, you're going through this terrible thing. I went through something similar. Oh my God, how are you doing?
That's
like,
a good
what
point.
are you doing? Versus like, oh, you think your daddy trauma? Wait till I one up you with mine. And I think that's what Harper was doing.
Such a good point.
And it's funny because Henry's like, do you think you see me? Do you think that's your special gift or whatever? You don't even know this about me. I'm sitting here protecting you from your daddy trauma. Here's mine. And Yaz, who is not a narcissist the same way Harper is like, oh, I didn't know this about you. And you can see her soften and you can see her warm towards him.
Yeah.
Because she is empathizing. So I think it's not like he was trying to one up her stuff. It was just like, you don't know me. You think you know me so well.
But I do think that the reason that she softened for the most part was less about the fact that he shared that, more about the fact that he had an opportunity to, I don't want to say take advantage of her, but like she was like, oh, I'm now willing to sleep with you. And he left instead of taking advantage of that.
Well, I think there was that. I think him acknowledging, hey, it was shitty of me to bring you here just as my date. I know it's like, okay, that validates her feelings. But he's like, but I still want you to be my date. And she's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Fair. All right. So now next scene, we're back in the hotel room with Otto, Peter, Petra, and Harper. So Peter comes back in and tells Otto that Petra's book is only 20% of Future Dawn, but makes up 50% of the fund's financial performance for the past 5 years. So Otto then tells him that he'll give them money and says once he anoints them, that more money will follow. Petra jokes, 2 women flew into a climate conference and left with a sin stock fund.
Well, that's the whole thing. Like all of this ESG stuff is just window dressing. So he's looking at them. He goes, what a picture, right? And you've got these 2 women, which is relatively unusual for a fund just starting out. And one of them's a young Black woman and they look so progressive.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck that. We don't care. That's all window dressing. We are just vicious vipers who are out to get returns no matter what. And by the way, I think Otto's saying that like very un-PC thing of like, how progressive, right? Just in case you were wondering, he's not one of the good guys. Like he's...
Okay, so then the next scene, we see Henry in the bathroom. And it's funny because he's on with Celeste, who we know is like his coverage in private wealth management. And
so Celeste, like Yaz's old boss, right? Like that's, I'm assuming that's the same Celeste.
I assumed so. I mean, I feel like they wouldn't have chosen the name Celeste for any
That's
other,
what
you know
I
what I mean?
figured.
Yeah. So he says he wants to unwind his personal stake in the company and crystallize that now. And so he asks how much money he will make if he gets out now. And then we don't hear what she says, but he just goes, woof. And then he looks himself in the mirror. You can see he's tormented and he feels like a failure. And he keeps telling himself, most companies fail. Most companies fail. So anyway, you can see he's like kind of starting to unwind a little bit. So next scene, we see Eric get a call from Wilhelmina. So he's out.
It's like the cocktail party after the conference has gone down. It's the last night.
And he gets a call from Wilhelmina who says that Europa Gaz, who, by the way, we saw at the panel front and center, did not look pleased, called and says they want to push the IPO citing macro conditions. Eric says, well, that's a soft firing. I can't believe we are effing siloed because they've like made this huge pivot to ESG.
No. He means, I can't believe we're so siloed as a firm that Frank in equity research was able to go rogue and publish like that is his line. So he means,
what does that mean?
The right arm silos. So silos within the investment bank. So he's like, why aren't we working together as one team, one dream, one peer?
Because it's illegal. It's illegal.
Right. Because it's illegal, right? He's like, I can't believe we're so siloed that he was allowed to go do that. Right? 100% illegal, like you said, to pressure someone to write something favorable, has been for over 2 decades, would be a very cut and dry crime for anyone to force him to issue a buy recommendation. So that's what he means by siloed.
Got it. Okay. I thought he meant that they were like siloed into this ESG thing because they were doing some big pivot, but your thing makes more sense. So he then asks if this is a bellwether for other IPOs because they obviously have a lot in the pipeline. And Wilhelmina says, I don't want to wall cross you, which I don't understand how this would be wall crossing because that's not what that means. It's usually with like research. So I don't know why, because she says this is more of an executive conversation above your level. But that's not really wall crossing, I assume.
Well, so, I mean, she's already told him that they're going to delay the IPO. So if she were to read him in on what other private companies are thinking about their future decision to go public or not, she likely would need to wall cross again, an interest rate sales guy.
Oh, because he's on, you're right. He's on this. It's so funny. I'm thinking he's an investment banker. He's not. He's freaking sales and trading.
He's a
you're
fixed
right.
income sales guy.
Which is like, what the heck? Again, this is not, you're right.
In ECM,
you're right.
So he's on the public market side of the firm. But
yes.
The reality is that he is a partner now at the firm. So he probably sits on like the executive investment committee. Like, so when you are that senior, you do get wall crossed on a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So she is stiff arming him and saying, you know what, you've basically been demoted. This is an executive level conversation. He is an executive now. Like basically like this is an A and B conversation. See your way out of it, right? You're too low now on the totem pole after blowing it on that panel to be let in on the future pipeline. So that's why he is freaking out because it's not just that the firm's pipeline is all of a sudden going to dry up of business and fees and all of the fun stuff that they get to do, but it's that he's effectively been demoted. And that's why he's yelling. He's like, Bill Adler wouldn't have done any different. Like,
I know.
How would anyone else have handled this total fiasco?
Yeah. So anyway, as he's outside, he just gets this like horrible news. He turns to try to get a drink at a bar. And that same initial asshole from the plane, who looks like he's been beat up, by the way, starts being super rude to Eric. And he's like,
making fun of him for being old.
And say he got cooked by some girl on stage. And he's with this woman who is like, no, baby, he can hear you. And anyway, like she seems concerned about Eric's feelings. So the guy ends up like walking off. And the woman then goes to Eric and says, I'm sorry he's being such an asshole. And she says, I'm Susie. And by the way, Robert's over there because remember, it's like Robert and Eric, the two amigos together. And Eric then introduced himself as Robert Spearing. And so anyway,
because
they start
she
talking.
is not dressed like one would typically dress at these conferences.
She's dressed like
a
prostitute.
Has giant boobs. She is in a very
glitter.
low-cut dress, glitter all over her face.
Fair.
Exactly. So he reads her for exactly what she is. And
again,
doesn't want to give him.
I thought that it was actually this guy's girlfriend at first, like the horrible dude. I was just like, oh, it's his girlfriend. So you have Eric now striking up a conversation with the prostitute, and then Robert, who sees Frank, right? So research analyst dude. And he goes over and he asks why he published during the panel. And Frank replies that there was an avalanche of competitors publishing and he didn't want to be last. Robert says, you were very bullish when the bank was fishing for Lumi investors. And Frank replied, well, the macro environment and the outlook has changed. And I didn't, by the way, publish a sell. And what would it have looked like if I'd published a buy after Lumi got called out like that on the panel? Robert replies, you know that a hold is effectively a sell signal to the market, given you work for us. And Frank replies, not where compliance is concerned. Look, I may work for an institution, but I'm not institutionalized. And Robert then says, well, you could at least buy me a drink, which I was like,
yes.
Wait a second.
What are we supposed to read into this here? He's sober. Last we saw. Why is he all of a sudden just like laughing it off and buying me a drink? And they kind of like cut scene. I read this like the first time I thought nothing of it. And on the second watch through, I was like, are we supposed to infer that they're going to hook up?
Which also he doesn't even, we find out later he doesn't
we'll get
sleep.
To that.
Okay.
But that's what, that's
same.
what
I had that same reaction.
I was like, okay, Robert, I wasn't familiar with your work. Like,
well, they had made it ambiguous. If you remember in season 1, there was some ambiguity whether he hooked up with like some guy who was trying to get a job at Pierpoint. And we were like, I don't think he would do that because he joked about it.
Right. Oh my gosh. I forgot about that. Great call. I just have no idea what's going on with Robert here.
I don't either.
It's a bit of an enigma to me, but I had that same read that you did. I was like, are they going to hook up? Like, Eric's buying a drink for the prostitute and Frank is buying a drink for Robert. Like, okay.
So anyway, that was interesting. Next scene is the next morning. Eric wakes up with the prostitute next to him. Yaz is like banging on his door and he's like, wake up. Like you were about to miss the meeting. And she tells him that she set up an instructional meeting with a new fund. And Eric says he'll be right down. Then realizes he has
instructional or introductional?
Introductional. I wrote instructional. Says, I set up an introductional meeting with a new fund. And Eric says he'll be right down. Then realizes he has to pay the prostitute. And she's going through like how much money. It's like 10,000, 20,000, an extra 20. And he's just like, I'll be right back. Oh, he, by the way,
hang on. She's itemizing her bill, right? And it all comes out to $19,000. And she goes, okay, we can just call it $20,000. Instead of being shocked by the price, all Eric says is, how was it? Do I fuck like a young man? And she comforts him by saying, you fuck like a young man who has a lot of money. And she offers to give him like her Coinbase details so he can pay her in Bitcoin, because I guess that's how prostitutes get paid these days. I don't know. And he runs out.
It's like, I don't have experience with this.
No, not something I'm familiar with. But what Eric's basically asking is, have I still got it? Right? I think that's the undercurrent here.
Yes.
There are multiple undercurrents here. But remember, the title of the episode is It, right? Who's got it? And who doesn't got it. And it, like I said, is many different things to all our different characters, right?
Yeah.
And for Eric, he is in full-on midlife crisis mode because he clearly doesn't have it when it comes to work right now. It is not going well, and it's about to go way worse. Yeah. And all he cares about is like, am I this sex object? And I think that he is on this spiral emotionally about this thing, which is really, really interesting. So he says, I gotta go, and runs out the door.
Yeah, well, because he's also like late for this meeting. But he runs downstairs and he then asks, he sees Robert.
Well, he runs into Robert at like the breakfast buffet.
And he's like, where did you sleep? So that's why I'm like, Robert, where did you sleep? Right, and Robert's like, oh, it was a little loud in the room. Remember, we were sharing a room.
A perfectly reasonable thing to say. Eric is like, oh my God, thank you so much for covering me. But I'm with you. The second time around, I was like, oh, are we supposed to infer that he spent the night with Frank?
I know. That's what I was like. Anyway, then this is hilarious, like comic relief. The prostitute comes downstairs going, Robert Spearing, everybody. And I mean, obviously, because Eric had introduced himself as Robert Spearing, so everyone's just confused. Eric is like, oh, I don't know what she's talking about.
But it's no mistake that he gave her Robert's name, of anyone's name. He could have given her Frank Wade. He could have given her like Henry Mock. He could have given her anyone's name, right? He gave her Robert Spearing's name because Robert is the hot young guy at the office whose hot face in the directory is the thing that Frank is lusting over with all of his buddies or whatever. Again, wildly inappropriate. Oh. Because he, in a weird way, wants to be Robert. So they're at the breakfast buffet, and Yasmin comes over, and she's like, hey, it's time for our meeting. Hey.
Yeah.
And Eric looks up and realizes that this meeting is with Harper and Petra. And it is like a horror movie reveal.
Yes.
It is like this suspense, this like doom and gloom music starts to play. And it's seriously like that moment in Scream, which that was like the horror movie I forced you to watch with me. And it
became like my favorite. I just need to tell this really quickly, which is so funny. So when we were young, Jen would always introduce me to like great movies, great books, whatever. And I remember we went over, I had a sleepover at her house, and she's like, I really want to watch Scream. And I was like, absolutely not. I hate horror movies. I was like, we are not watching that. And then she turns it on. She's like, this isn't Scream. I don't know. What is this movie? But this is like
literally the opening title.
And then we watch it. I was like, oh, this is actually like fun. Because it's a funny movie.
Funny. Yeah.
It's a funny movie. And it became like one of my favorite movies for a while. Because
I hate horror movies as well. I do not like unnecessarily violence and gore. I don't like jump scares. I don't like any of that. But Scream was like a actually like brilliantly written movie at the time. It was a commentary on the horror genre. It wasn't supposed to be horror for horror's sake, which I just really appreciated as a 7th grader or whatever.
Yeah.
This is that moment at the end where you reveal that like the villain was there all along. Mm-hmm. And so he walks up to the table and he's like, Yaz, what is this all about? And she says, I'm just doing my job, which always makes me think of that scene in The Mighty Ducks. Petra invites Eric to sit down. He doesn't. He's just standing there and he looks shell-shocked. So sorry, I'll let you start telling the story. I was just like, it was an amazing moment.
No, it was. I mean, so Eric...
This is why It, and like the horror movie title is so fitting here. This is a horror movie.
Yes. Well, so Eric wants no part of this meeting. And he's like, we can't cover you. Like, we have a minimum.
Hang on. He said... like when he's like, what is this all about? Right. Petra says, we want Pierpoint to be our broker. And so Eric immediately is like, oh, phew, I don't have to say yes because they don't have any money. Right. So he goes, we have an assets under management threshold for clients we take on. And Petra, who knows this, is like, yeah, what's the threshold, bitch? Like, you know, like,
Yep. And so she tells him that Otto's anchor investment is $200 million, but that commitment has now opened the door to more investment. And so Harper then says, this is in all of our interest. We give you commission, you service us. Please have a seat.
He is just looking at Petra. He will not even look in Harper's direction.
Yeah.
And she leans in with this creepy ass smile.
Yes.
And she goes, look, this is in all of our best interest. We give you a commission. You service us. What does this sound like? The transactional relationship with the prostitute. This is exactly the same thing. Only Eric is now the prostitute. And Harper is the John controlling the wallet. This is like immediate side by side. That is why these scenes are completely adjacent.
Yeah.
It is, holy shit, I'm now the prostitute. And there's no way out of this de facto contractual agreement that they're about to have.
Yep. And so Harper is like, we're doing you a favor. Eric looks at Petra and says, do you know who you're dealing with here? Which, by the way, like, honestly, I mean, obviously, Petra does, but like also I don't think she
doesn't.
Does. She does.
No.
And Petra says, it's a bit rude to talk about her like that in front of her. And Eric asks, what do you want? And Petra says, the practical things a fund wants from its broker: trading color, fair spreads, timely research, corporate access. Yaz says, well, obviously Pierpoint is first in class in all of those areas. And my existing relationship with Harper means that I can offer you bespoke service. Harper adds, and I expect you to answer the phone every time I dial, looking straight at Eric. Meanwhile, Eric will not make eye contact with her. And I think Yaz here is just a little bit, because she initially was like, oh, you're doing me a favor. And now she's like, okay, she's literally just trying to get back at him. So I think she feels a little like,
oh. About Yaz.
This is not what she wanted.
This isn't about their relationship. She suddenly realizes that there's no greater punishment or comeuppance for Eric than having to be Harper's salesperson.
Yep.
And Yaz realizes that this isn't about their friendship. This isn't about her being an amazing salesperson who now gets this great new account, right?
Yeah.
And so Harper just totally used her to take revenge on Eric.
Yes. And Harper is zoomed. It's like, this scene is wild.
She looks like a Chucky doll.
Yes. I mean, that is so true. And honestly, maybe that is also part of the it. Like, she was supposed to be the scary clown.
Again, I think this is such a brilliantly, there's no, I mean, maybe not. Maybe I'm reading way too much into this.
No.
This is brilliant right now.
Yes. And Harper is zoomed in on Eric with like this creepy smile on her face. And Eric obviously is like, will not look at her. And Harper smirking says, Eric, look at me. Your face is shimmering. You have glitter all over your face, because he had slept with a prostitute. The prostitute had glitter. Now he has glitter on his face. Back to your point, he is the prostitute. But that whole scene was so uncomfortable. If I was Petra, I would be having like, not second thoughts, like 100 thoughts about, what am I doing here? She is a child and she is scary AF. And now I guess she also doesn't have a choice, because her role at Future Dawn is gone. So she doesn't have an option. Again, Harper took that away from her with what she did at the at that panel. But this should be giving Petra that this is like, you are in the room with the serial killer. Get out. Like, what are you doing? And instead, she's just like, why are you talking about her like that behind her?
Well, no, I think she 100% understands, because in the next scene, they're standing together in the lobby, right? Talking about like next steps or whatever. Anna walks by, flips them the bird. And Petra says to Harper, you know what partnership means. And I think what she's referencing is like, hey, like, you're not going to stab me in the back like you stabbed all these other people in the back, right? And Harper says, yes, no unilateral decisions. You don't need to feel insecure about not being a people person. You just hadn't found your people yet. Yeah. I don't think that's what Petra was asking, okay? No. This is such a backhanded compliment. Like, it makes me think that whatever partnership they do have is not long for the world. Because I think Petra was being like, dude, like, you can't just keep going rogue. There's a lot more here that I clearly have not been read in on. And like, your wild stunt, okay, it worked this time, but never again, right? And knowing Harper, it's like, this is probably just the opening salvo in like many more crazy things.
Yeah. So Petra then says, so what are we going to call this new venture? And Harper replies, Leviathan, which that goes back because I didn't get any of the earlier stuff that you went into with Leviathan. So that's why I was so happy that you did. Because like, to me, this is like, whoop, right over my head.
It is so brilliant. It's all come full circle. And really the question is, right, is Harper going to be a good and just ruler with the authority given to her by the people who are investing? Or is she going to be a tyrant and a dictator with her newly regained power over Eric and Yaz, right? And I think we can only infer likely the latter.
Yeah. And so then in the final scene, we have Eric and Robert, who are in the back of the plane again. And Robert says, I'm starting to think that things would have worked out exactly the same without us. And Eric says, I can't believe there wasn't any snow. Now, At the same time, you then see Henry walk towards the back of the plane, close the curtain so that there's now a bead, but like not really. It's one of those like sad curtains that like doesn't close all the way. Yeah, but like you can still see through it. And then proceed, like Henry and Yaz proceed to hook up while Robert and Eric are just like, oh dear God, and they put in some headphones to try to be like,
their AirPods in their ears or whatever, and Eric's closing his eyes and kind of like stealing himself, like not to listen or whatever.
Yeah.
This episode got a solid A in my books. Like, I mean, there were so many layers. It's so good.
But this is why I don't understand why this show does not get the awards that it should. It is so, when it wants to, not every episode. And again, I hate the next one that's coming up after this, but like it is so brilliantly written. I mean, there is so much complexity. The people who are writing this, like the nuances of calling yourself a traitor versus like, I was like, there is so much here. And I think it's just because so much of it is lost on probably the critics who just have no freaking clue. Someone like literally wrote us and said, if the critics listened to your podcast, like it would get some awards. This should win
more people
awards.
Listen. Share
By the way, Netflix. End of the day, I kind of hope like nobody wins because I don't want HBO like keep these shows.
I don't want it to go away, but I do think it speaks to the broader differential in understanding, right? Where you grew up in the more mainstream world of Wall Street that most people understand. It's the world of equities, up, down, right? Like most people don't understand the nuances of fixed income sales and trading, of the macro hedge fund world, of all these things. So when you hear that difference between salesperson and trader, you now know, but the average person doesn't. There are so many things here that are super niche.
And PM, like they're throwing out the word PM. That is not something that your average person has probably ever heard of.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they've heard of portfolio manager, but they don't understand that, like, remember when we very first started this and I was like, trader, PM, like people will use them interchangeably. And people were like, no, they don't. And equity
I don't think that they don't. Like, it depends on the fund. That's the whole thing.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Yeah, in this world, that's why Harper calls herself a trader. Like then she like levels up to PM and stuff like that. I think that unlike Succession, which is just like, okay, it's companies and people understand companies and they're not talking about these other things. And they're not talking about this world where like relatively few people understand this world the way that they understand corporate America. Yep. And we're just out here doing God's work.
But this is so fun. Do we want to do bullish and bearish?
Yeah.
I mean, duh. Bullish on Harper and Petra.
And Eric is down in the dumps. I'm still bearish on Robert. Robert sucks. This would be a great place for the Lumi plot to end and for Henry Muck to exit stage left. I would love to wrap up his story here. Is there more Henry Muck in this season?
I think he's into season 4. Oh yeah. He is very much going to be.
Okay. Well, I hope they add something more interesting because I actually thought this would have been a nice little tie it up with a bow end to his story.
No, he doesn't go anywhere.
I am devastated to hear that you're not into the next episode, by the way, because I watched the preview for it and it was like, it looked like a Rishi bottle episode. And I was like, oh, we're just going to do like
there is a Rishi bottle episode. There is an episode like that. And I thought it was later and it looks I did not like awesome.
I am excited. I'm probably going to hop to watching it tonight so we can turn these out a little bit faster and make sure we're all caught up. We've got a month and 2 days.
Amazing. All right. So if you are just finding this, we are going to publish this both on our big podcast channel. So we're going to publish this on the Wall Street Skinny, both on our YouTube and all that. But we also have a separate industry podcast as a standalone. So if you are just finding this or just want to re-binge industry and you haven't listened to any of these episodes, you literally can go episode by episode, starting season 1, episode 1, on the industry feed so that you don't have to like literally try to figure out like, oh, okay, it was like episode 174 and then I need to go to like 2, whatever. So go to the separate feed and you can get them all in one place. Again, if you want to recap and like figure out what happened in the last season and you don't want to watch it again, you just want to listen to it. And we will be back probably we'll record early next week. And this is going to be coming out in the next few days if we can get it out. So thank you guys so much and we will see you next time.